Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Birthday Surprise. Vaughn Mercer stared at the cream-colored invitation in his hand, tracing the embossed lettering with his thumb. Natalie's 35th birthday celebration. His ex-wife of 2 years, celebrating in the sprawling lake house that had once been their shared dream. Now she lived there with Bradley Hoffman, the man she'd married just 8 months after their divorce was finalized. "You don't have to go, Dad," Lily said, her 7-year-old eyes wise beyond their years as she packed her overnight bag. "I can tell Mom you had to work." Vaughn knelt down to her level. "And miss dropping you off?" "Never. Besides, your mom and I agreed to be civil for your sake." What he didn't say was that he would endure far worse than an awkward social gathering to ensure he never missed a moment of Lily's life. The custody arrangement already took too much from him. Every other weekend and Wednesday dinners hardly seemed enough to watch his daughter grow. "Bradley doesn't like when you come inside," Lily said matter-of-factly. Vaughn kept his expression neutral, though his jaw tightened. "Well, that's Bradley's problem, isn't it?" The lake house loomed ahead as Vaughn's Audi wound down the private drive. Natalie had insisted on keeping it in the divorce, the place where they'd spent their first 5 anniversaries before buying it outright. Now, it was transformed, the rustic charm he'd loved replaced with sleek, modern furnishings. Even the exterior had been painted from warm cedar to sterile white. Cars lined the circular driveway. He recognized Natalie's parents' Lexus and several vehicles belonging to friends who'd chosen sides after the divorce. None had chosen his. "Lily!" Natalie exclaimed as they entered, her smile faltering when she spotted Vaughn. She wore a form-fitting black dress, her blonde hair styled in loose waves. "I didn't expect you to come in. Just dropping off the birthday girl," Vaughn said, handing Lily's overnight bag to Natalie. "Happy birthday." Before Natalie could respond, Theodore and Diana Keller approached, their faces hardening at the sight of their former son-in-law. Behind them, Bradley emerged from the crowd, his arm possessively circling Natalie's waist. "Vaughn," Theodore said coldly. "What a surprise." "Hardly a welcome one," Diana muttered, loud enough for Vaughn to hear. Bradley smirked. "Why are you even here?" he asked, as Diana and Theodore laughed in response. The tension was palpable. Vaughn had faced worse in his years as a private security specialist. Warlords and criminals had tried to intimidate him in ways these suburban socialites couldn't imagine. But something in their collective dismissal cut deeper than he cared to admit. "Dad's bringing me to Mom's party," Lily said defensively, moving closer to Vaughn. Bradley bent down to Lily's level, his voice saccharine. "Sweetie, why don't you go find the other kids? They're in the game room, downstairs." "Actually," Lily said, grabbing Vaughn's hand with unexpected urgency, "Dad, we need to leave. Something's wrong." The room fell silent. Vaughn looked into his daughter's eyes and saw genuine fear there. He gave a quiet nod. "I think we'll skip the party after all," Vaughn said calmly. "Seems Lily's not feeling up to it." Natalie stepped forward, her expression shifting from embarrassment to concern. "What's wrong, honey? Are you sick?" "She's fine," Bradley interjected. "She just wants attention." Vaughn felt Lily's grip tighten, her small fingers digging into his palm. Years of training had taught him to recognize warning signs, and every instinct told him his daughter's fear was genuine. "We're leaving," he said firmly. "I'll bring her back tomorrow." "You can't just change the custody schedule whenever you want," Natalie protested, but there was something off about her reaction, more calculated than concerned. Theodore stepped forward aggressively. "Now listen here, Mercer. You don't get to waltz in and disrupt Natalie's special day." As the confrontation escalated, Vaughn noticed something strange. A man standing near the bar was watching the scene with unusual intensity. He wasn't part of Natalie's usual social circle. Vaughn would have remembered him. The stranger caught Vaughn's eye briefly before turning away. "I'll call you later," Vaughn told Natalie, already guiding Lily toward the door. Outside, Lily remained silent until they were safely in the car and down the driveway. "You need to drive fast, Dad," she whispered, looking over her shoulder. "What's going on, Lily Pad? What scared you in there?" Her voice trembled. "I heard Bradley and that man with the scar talking in the study. They said they were going to take care of loose ends tonight." She paused, eyes wide. "Dad, they said your name." As Vaughn's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, a black SUV appeared in his rearview mirror, accelerating rapidly behind them. Chapter 2: Dead Drops and Revelations. The SUV hung back just enough to maintain visual contact without being obvious, a textbook surveillance technique that Vaughn recognized instantly. He'd performed the same maneuver countless times during his 12 years with Sentinel Security Group before starting his own consulting firm. "Lily, I need you to get down," Vaughn instructed calmly, his mind racing through contingency plans. "Lie on the floor behind my seat and stay there until I say it's safe." "Are the bad men following us?" Lily asked, her voice remarkably steady as she unbuckled and slid down. "Just being cautious," Vaughn replied, taking a sharp turn onto a side road. The SUV followed. Confirmation. Vaughn's training took over. He'd spent years protecting high-value targets in hostile environments across the globe. Now, the most precious cargo he'd ever transported was his daughter, and someone was trailing them with unknown intent. He needed a defensible position and information. 20 minutes of evasive driving later, Vaughn pulled into the underground parking garage of an office building where his friend Dominic Rizzo maintained a private security firm. "Stay close," he instructed Lily as they hurried through the service entrance and up to Dominic's empty office suite. Vaughn used his emergency key and quickly disabled the alarm. "Uncle Dom's not here?" Lily asked, looking around the darkened office. "He's in Dallas this week," Vaughn replied, moving to the security console. "But his systems are always working." He pulled up the exterior cameras, confirming the black SUV had not followed them into the garage. For now, they were clear. "Lily," Vaughn said gently, kneeling before his daughter, "I need you to tell me everything you heard at the party, even things that might not seem important." Lily's account was fragmented but disturbing. Bradley and a man she described as having an angry line on his face, presumably a scar, had been discussing something involving offshore accounts, a timeline that had been accelerated, and Vaughn being a problem that needed handling. "They seemed scared when they talked about a woman named Portia," Lily added. "Bradley said she was getting suspicious and might talk to you." The name hit Vaughn like a physical blow. Portia Devereux had been Natalie's best friend since college, and the one person who had reached out to Vaughn after the divorce, hinting that there was more to the breakup than he knew. They'd met for coffee once, 3 months ago, but she'd been vague and seemed frightened. She'd promised to contact him again with proof, but never did. Vaughn had dismissed it as divorce drama at the time, focusing instead on rebuilding his life and being there for Lily. Now, he wondered if that had been a catastrophic mistake. While Lily dozed on the office couch, Vaughn began pulling threads. A deep search on Bradley Hoffman revealed inconsistencies in his background. The successful investment advisor persona showed cracks under scrutiny, periodic employment gaps, sudden relocations, and a suspicious absence of digital footprint before 2015. More disturbing was what Vaughn found on Theodore Keller, Natalie's father. The retired banking executive had been investigated twice by federal authorities for suspicious financial transactions. Both cases were abruptly closed without charges. The lead investigators subsequently transferred or retired. By midnight, Vaughn had compiled enough to suspect he'd barely scratched the surface of whatever was happening. He needed more resources and a safe place for Lily. A text message alert broke his concentration. An unknown number with a single message. Portia Devereux found dead in her apartment. Apparent suicide. Police involved. Watch yourself. Vaughn stared at his phone, ice forming in his veins. The message could only have come from one of his former colleagues at Sentinel, people who monitored police bands and kept tabs on potential security threats. Something much darker than a bitter ex-wife and her arrogant new husband was unfolding. Vaughn made 3 calls, one to his sister Renee to arrange emergency care for Lily, one to his attorney to document the custody situation, and one to a former associate who specialized in deep background investigations. By dawn, Lily was safely with his sister in a vacation cabin outside cell coverage, and Vaughn was back at his condo, methodically preparing for what was coming. He pulled his go bag from the hidden compartment in his closet. Cash, untraceable burner phones, and the Glock 19 he'd carried during his most sensitive operations overseas. As he loaded the weapon, Natalie's frantic voice filled his voicemail. "Where the hell are you with my daughter? Bradley's calling the police for kidnapping. This is insane, Vaughn. Whatever you think you're doing." He deleted the message and powered down his primary phone. The rules had changed. Someone had killed Portia to keep her quiet, and they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate him next. But unlike Portia, Vaughn wasn't easily eliminated. And now, he had something much more powerful than evidence. He had purpose. Chapter 3: The Devil's Ledger. Rain lashed against the windows of the abandoned waterfront warehouse as Vaughn waited, the cavernous space illuminated only by the faint glow of the city skyline. He checked his watch, 2:37 a.m., and adjusted his position behind a stack of rotting pallets. Franklin Wells was 20 minutes late, which was unlike the fastidious former CIA analyst. In their years working together at Sentinel, Wells had earned the nickname Clockwork for his precision. A delay meant complications. The heavy metal door finally creaked open, and Wells slipped inside, his raincoat glistening with moisture. He moved cautiously, scanning the shadows before approaching the meeting point. "You look like shit, Mercer," Wells said by way of greeting, his voice barely audible over the rain hammering the metal roof. "3 days of digging through other people's nightmares will do that," Vaughn replied. "Tell me you found something." Wells placed a weatherproof case on the ground between them. "I found the Devil's Ledger." He glanced nervously toward the door. "You were right about Bradley Hoffman. The man doesn't exist, at least not before 2015. His real name is Preston Rayburn, former financial operations specialist for a private military contractor called Obsidian Solutions Group. Never heard of them. That's by design. They operate in the spaces between official military operations and corporate interests. Very illegal, very profitable. Your ex-father-in-law, Theodore Keller, was their banking connection through Heritage Trust." Vaughn processed this information, the pieces starting to align. "And Natalie?" Wells looked uncomfortable. "That's where it gets complicated. I can't tell if she's a victim or a participant. Either way, she's in deep." He tapped the case. "Everything's in there. Account numbers, transactions, identities. Enough to bury them all. And Portia Devereux officially ruled a suicide yesterday. Unofficially, Wells grimaced. The ME's preliminary report noted defensive wounds inconsistent with self-harm. Someone made it look like she killed herself. Vaughn had suspected as much. Portia had been trying to warn him months ago, and it had cost her life. "There's more," Wells continued. "Obsidian is preparing for something big. Multiple offshore transfers, new identities being established. Whatever they've been doing, they're getting ready to disappear." "With my daughter?" Vaughn's voice had a dangerous edge. "The paperwork I found includes passport documentation for Natalie and a minor female. Different last name, but the birth date matches your daughter's." Vaughn had suspected this since finding the transaction records for a private air charter scheduled 3 days from now. Destination Sao Paulo, connecting to an undisclosed final location. "You need to take this to the FBI," Wells urged. "This is bigger than personal revenge, Vaughn. These people have government contracts, connections in intelligence communities. They've eliminated witnesses before. Like they'll eliminate Lily if she becomes inconvenient." Vaughn asked coldly, "How long would a federal investigation take? Months? Years? By then, my daughter will be gone." Wells sighed, recognizing the resolved expression on his former colleague's face. "What's your play, then?" "I'm going to dismantle their operation, piece by piece," Vaughn said, opening the case to review its contents. "Starting tonight." Among the documents was a detailed dossier on the scarred man Lily had described. Malcolm Reeves, Obsidian's head of security and former Special Forces operator with a troubling record of problem-solving. "One last thing," Wells said, handing Vaughn a flash drive. "Security footage from Portia Devereux's apartment building the night she died. Took some doing to get this. Shows Reeves entering her building at 11:42 p.m., leaving at 12:17 a.m. Her time of death was estimated between 11:30 p.m. and 12:30 a.m. Vaughn pocketed the drive. "You should disappear for a while," Franklin. Take that vacation to New Zealand you've been talking about. Already booked, Wells confirmed. Vaughn. He hesitated. The woman you married. Either she's been living a double life for years, or she's been systematically deceived by these people. Either way, she's not who you thought she was. The revelation should have hurt, but Vaughn felt only cold resolve. The Natalie he'd loved, or thought he'd loved, had vanished long ago, replaced by a stranger wearing his wife's face. Get going, Vaughn said. And Wells? Thank you. After Wells departed, Vaughn remained in the warehouse, methodically reviewing the evidence and formulating his strategy. The documents revealed a complex network of financial crimes spanning 5 countries, with Theodore Keller and Bradley/Preston at the center. Obsidian had been laundering money through Heritage Trust for years, while using its security operations as cover for activities too terrible to contemplate. But the most sickening discovery came when Vaughn accessed the encrypted files on the flash drive. Beyond the security footage of Reeves entering Porsche's building was a folder labeled Leverage containing surveillance photos of him and Lily at the park, at her school, outside his condo. They'd been watching his daughter, documenting her movements, preparing to use her as collateral. As dawn broke over the city, Von Mercer made a vow. The people who threatened his daughter wouldn't face justice in a courtroom. They would face him, and he would be neither swift nor merciful. He began with a series of phone calls to former associates across the globe, specialists who operated in the shadows and owed him favors. By noon, his plan was in motion. Not the desperate actions of a wronged ex-husband, but the precise, calculated strategy of a man who had spent his career anticipating and neutralizing threats. The first strike would come that very night. Chapter 4. First Blood. The exclusive Oakmont Country Club hummed with subdued conversation as the city's elite gathered for the annual charity gala. At a corner table in the cigar lounge, Theodore Keller held court with 3 other men, their faces flushed from expensive scotch and self-importance. The Shanghai deal closes next week, Theodore was saying. Another $30 million moving through the Cayman account. Scott Levinson, Heritage Trust compliance officer, shifted uncomfortably. We need to discuss the recent Federal Banking Commission inquiries, Theodore. They're asking specific questions about transaction patterns. They always ask questions, Theodore dismissed with a wave. That's why we pay Senator Wilmington's consultation fees. From his position at the bar, Vaughn observed the interaction through the reflection in the mirror behind the bottles. The electronic device in his pocket had been capturing every word of Theodore's conversation for the past 40 minutes. The bartender slid another bourbon toward Vaughn. Compliments of the gentleman at the end of the bar. Vaughn turned, surprised to find Malcolm Reeves, the scarred man from Natalie's party, watching him with cold calculation. Their eyes met, an unspoken challenge passing between them. After a moment, Vaughn picked up his drink and walked over. Bold move, approaching me in public, Vaughn said, taking the seat beside Reeves. Professional courtesy, Reeves replied. One operator to another. I've reviewed your file. Impressive work in Tehran. In Bogota. I'm retired. No one with your skill set truly retires, Mr. Mercer. They just change employers. Reeves sipped his whiskey. You've been making inquiries. Accessing systems you shouldn't. Looking into matters that don't concern you. When someone puts surveillance on my daughter, it becomes my concern. Reeves didn't bother denying it. Insurance. Nothing more. Your ex-wife is valuable to certain interests. By extension, so is the child. You killed Portia Devereux. Let's call an unfortunate business necessity. She became unreliable. Reeves leaned closer. This conversation is a professional courtesy. A warning. Stand down. Whatever you think you know, whatever evidence you believe you have, it won't matter. The people I work for exist beyond accountability. Vaughn's expression remained impassive. Is that what you told Portia before you staged your suicide? Something dangerous flashed in Reeves' eyes. Your daughter seems happy with her mother and stepfather. It would be a shame to traumatize her with unnecessary complications. You threatened my daughter again, Vaughn said quietly, and they won't find enough of you to identify. Reeves smirked. Brave words from a man outmatched and outnumbered. He stood, dropping cash on the bar. This is your only warning, Mercer. Next time won't be a conversation. After Reeves departed, Vaughn remained for another 20 minutes, watching Theodore's group break up. When Theodore headed for the restroom, Vaughn followed. The ornate bathroom was empty except for the two of them. Theodore froze when he saw Vaughn's reflection in the mirror. "What the hell are you doing here?" Theodore demanded, turning to face his former son-in-law. "I know about Obsidian," Vaughn said calmly. "I know about the money laundering through Heritage Trust. I know you're planning to disappear with Natalie and my daughter." The color drained from Theodore's face. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Portia Devereux tried to warn me. You had her killed." "I didn't," Theodore began, then caught himself. "Whatever you think you know, you can't prove it. And if you could, you wouldn't be here alone. You'd have brought authorities." "I'm not interested in legal justice," Vaughn replied. "Just justice." "Are you threatening me?" Theodore's indignation barely masked his fear. "I'm promising you this. If you try to take my daughter out of the country, I will dismantle everything you've built. Everyone you care about will watch as you're exposed and ruined." Theodore's shock transformed into cruel amusement. "You still don't get it, do you? Natalie never loved you. You were useful, a security expert with connections and no family complications. She married you on my instruction. Your function was to provide cover and legitimacy while we expanded operations." The revelation landed like a physical blow, but Vaughn's expression remained unchanged. "And Lily, an unfortunate complication. Natalie was supposed to remain childless, but she became attached to the idea of motherhood." Theodore straightened his tie. "You've wasted enough of my time with these melodramatic accusations. Stay away from my family, where the consequences will be severe." As Theodore moved to leave, Vaughn placed a hand on his shoulder. "One last thing." He held up his phone, showing Theodore the active recording. "Your conversation about the Shanghai deal and Senator Wilmington has already been sent to 3 separate secure locations. If anything happens to me or Lily, it goes to the FBI, Interpol, and the Wall Street Journal simultaneously." Theodore's face contorted with rage. "You're playing a dangerous game." "No," Vaughn replied. "I'm ending one." Later that night, Scott Levinson, Heritage Trust compliance officer, received an anonymous package containing irrefutable evidence of Theodore Keller's financial crimes, along with details of Obsidian's operations. By morning, he would deliver it all to the Federal Banking Commission, setting in motion the first phase of Vaughn's plan. Meanwhile, in a luxury downtown apartment, Malcolm Reeves discovered his secure personal server had been breached, all files copied and deleted. His offshore accounts were emptied, digital identity erased. On his bathroom mirror, written in his own shaving cream, "First warning." The hunt had begun. Chapter 5. The Hourglass Turns. Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds of the safe house apartment as Vaughn reviewed the latest intelligence from his network. Heritage Trust was in chaos. The Federal Banking Commission had arrived unannounced at 8 a.m. with a warrant, and Theodore Keller had been escorted from the building in full view of his employees. It would be hours before he secured bail. The burner phone on the table buzzed. A text from his sister. "Lily's safe. No unusual activity. She misses you." Vaughn allowed himself a moment of relief before refocusing. The clock was ticking. With Theodore detained, Obsidian would accelerate their evacuation plans. He needed to move quickly. The television news played in the background. A reporter standing outside Heritage Trust headquarters. Allegations of extensive money laundering and securities fraud. Sources close to the investigation suggest connections to international arms dealing through a private military contractor. Vaughn's phone buzzed again, this time his primary cell phone, which he kept powered off except for brief checks. 17 missed calls from Natalie, 3 from Bradley, and a voicemail from his attorney. He listened to the attorney's message first. "Vaughn, they filed emergency custody modification papers alleging parental kidnapping. Judge Hanscom granted a temporary order. You need to produce Lily immediately or face criminal charges. Call me." Next came Natalie's latest voicemail, her voice eerily calm. "Vaughn, you've put us in an impossible position. Whatever you think you know, you're wrong. Bradley and I just want what's best for Lily. Bring her home, and we can talk this through like adults. Please, before this gets any worse. The calculated manipulation in her tone confirmed what Theodore had revealed. Natalie had never been who she pretended to be. The woman he'd loved, the mother of his child, had been a carefully constructed fiction. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. 3 short raps, a pause, then 2 more, the arranged signal. Vaughn checked the peephole before admitting Gabriella Acosta, a former intelligence analyst who now worked as a private investigator. "You look terrible," she observed, setting down her laptop bag. "Sleeping's overrated," Vaughn replied. "What did you find?" "Your ex-wife's been busy," Gabriella said, opening her laptop. "In the past 48 hours, she's liquidated over $2 million in assets and transferred the funds through a series of shell companies. Classic laundering pattern. Destination: final transfer went to an account in the Cayman Islands registered to a company called Blue Horizon Ventures. Obsidian subsidiary, Vaughn noted. They're preparing to run. Gabriella nodded. There's more. Bradley Hoffman, or Preston Rayburn, whatever he's calling himself, has been making calls to a private airfield outside the city. Changed their departure time from Friday to tomorrow night. The accelerated timeline was concerning but not unexpected. With Theodore compromised and Vaughn clearly onto them, they would be desperate to escape. What about Malcolm Reeves? Gabriella's expression turned grim. He's gone completely dark since his accounts were drained. But before he disappeared, he made contact with these 3 individuals. She displayed photos of hard-looking men, former Obsidian operatives, professional hitters. He's assembling a kill team, Vaughn concluded. Most likely. And based on their movement patterns, they're already in the city. Vaughn considered this development. Reeves was dangerous alone. With a team of trained killers, the threat level increased exponentially. "There's one more thing you should see," Gabriella said, pulling up an email thread. "I managed to access Bradley's secure server. These communications between him and Theodore Keller go back 7 years, including detailed discussions of using you for operational cover and exit strategy if things went south." Vaughn scanned the emails, his expression hardening as he read the clinical assessment of his vulnerabilities, the cold calculation of how his security expertise could benefit their operation, how his love for Natalie made him easy to manipulate. One passage stood out with sickening clarity. Mercer's background is perfect, orphaned at 12, minimal family connections, devoted to his career. Once Natalie establishes the relationship, his protective instincts will make him putty in her hands. The marriage needs to last 3 to 5 years minimum for optimal credibility. Vaughn had always believed his orphan status and self-reliance were strengths. These people had seen them as exploitable weaknesses. "They've been planning this for years," he said quietly. "It gets worse," Gabriella replied, showing him another document. "Contingency plans for asset removal if you became problematic. They were prepared to eliminate you from the beginning." The final piece clicked into place. His marriage, his life with Natalie, all of it had been an elaborate cover operation. The only real thing to come from it was Lily, and even she had been viewed as a complication rather than a child. "What's your next move?" Gabriella asked. Vaughn closed the laptop. "I need to see Natalie. Face to face. That's suicide with Reeves hunting you." "I'm counting on it," Vaughn replied. "Give me everything on the private airfield, security layouts, personnel, flight plans. And I need eyes on Bradley. If he moves, I want to know." After Gabriella left, Vaughn prepared for the confrontation ahead. He cleaned his weapon, methodically checked his equipment, and reviewed the intelligence again. The pieces were in place. Now he needed to force his opponents to make their move. He sent a text message to Natalie from a burner phone. "We need to talk. Alone. About Lily's future. Meet me at Westlake Park near the fountain. 3 p.m. Come alone, or I release everything I have to the authorities." The response came within minutes. "I'll be there." Vaughn knew she wouldn't come alone. Bradley would insist on protection, especially with Reeves available. They would see this as an opportunity to eliminate the threat he posed, secure Lily's location, and proceed with their escape plan. It was exactly what he was counting on. At precisely 2:45 p.m., Vaughn entered Westlake Park from the south entrance, keeping to the crowded areas as he made his way toward the fountain. He spotted Natalie immediately, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sun as she sat on a bench, sunglasses concealing her eyes. What she didn't realize was that Vaughn had arrived 90 minutes earlier to position resources and identify the trap they'd set. From his vantage point, he could see the two men in casual clothes positioned at the north and east entrances. A third man sat reading a newspaper on a bench with clear sight lines to Natalie. Malcolm Rees himself would be coordinating from a distance, likely from one of the overlooking buildings. Vaughn approached Natalie from behind, noting how she tensed when she sensed his presence. "Hello, Natalie," he said, taking a seat beside her. "Or should I use your operational designation? Siren, wasn't it? From the Project Odysseus files." She removed her sunglasses, her blue eyes cold and calculating, so different from the warm gaze he'd once loved. "You've been busy, so have you. Liquidating assets, preparing new identities, arranging private transportation. It's not what you think," she said, her voice taking on the concerned tone she'd perfected over their years together. "Theodore's been involved in some questionable business dealings. Bradley and I just found out. We're trying to protect Lily." "Stop lying," Vaughn said quietly. "I know everything. About Obsidian, about your role in the operation, about how you were assigned to marry me as cover." For a moment, Natalie's composure slipped, genuine surprise crossing her features. Then her expression hardened. "Fine. What do you want?" "To understand one thing," Vaughn replied. "Was any of it real? Any moment of our life together?" Natalie hesitated, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. "Lily," she finally said. "Lily wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't supposed to get pregnant. But when it happened," she trailed off, "having her change things. But not enough to stop using her as leverage against me." "We do what's necessary to survive," Natalie replied coldly. "Now, where is she?" "Safe. Beyond your reach." Natalie's eyes narrowed. "Reeves will find her. He finds everyone." "Reeves is otherwise occupied," Vaughn said, nodding slightly toward the north entrance where police officers were now approaching one of the surveillance men. "Anonymous tip about an armed suspect. Same for your east entrance coverage." Alarm spread across Natalie's face as she realized the trap had been reversed. "You can't win this, Vaughn. You don't understand the resources aligned against you." "I understand perfectly," Vaughn replied, standing up. "Give Bradley a message for me. Tell him I'm coming for him next." As he walked away, Natalie called after him, "They'll kill you. You can't protect Lily if you're dead." Vaughn didn't look back. Phase 2 of his plan was now in motion. Chapter 6, Betrayal's Price. The private airfield glowed under security lights as evening descended, its perimeter patrolled by armed guards. Not the typical security for a civilian facility. From his observation position in the tree line, Vaughn counted 6 men with military-grade weapons and tactical movement patterns. Definitely Obsidian personnel. His earpiece crackled. "Perimeter sweep approaching your position," warned Gabriella, who was monitoring the security feed she'd hacked. 30 seconds. Vaughn melted deeper into the shadows as 2 guards passed within yards of his location, their conversation drifting through the darkness. "Triple the detail after what happened to Keller," one was saying. "Rayburn's freaking out. Can you blame him? Someone systematically dismantled our entire operation in 72 hours. You think it's really just the ex-husband? Whoever it is, they're good. Too good." Once they passed, Vaughn continued his approach to the hangar where a Gulfstream G650 was being prepared for departure. According to the flight plan Gabriella had obtained, it was scheduled for a 2 a.m. takeoff, destination Sao Paulo, then onward to an undisclosed location. "I have eyes on primary target," Gabriella reported. "Bradley and Natalie just arrived. 2-vehicle convoy, heavily armed escort. Any sign of Reeves?" "Negative, but satellite thermal shows 8, possibly 9 armed individuals inside the main hangar. They're expecting trouble. They were right to expect it, though not in the way they anticipated." Vaughn had no intention of assaulting a fortified position held by former Special Forces operators. He had a different approach in mind. Execute Phase 3, he instructed. Across the city, coordinated events began unfolding. Federal agents raided 3 Obsidian Front companies based on anonymous tips and documented evidence. Local police, acting on similar information, secured Malcolm Reeves' safe house, finding enough illegal weapons to guarantee federal charges. Most significantly, every major news outlet simultaneously received comprehensive files on Obsidian's illegal operations, complete with Bradley Hoffman/Preston Rayburn's involvement and connections to Theodore Keller. The reaction at the airfield was immediate. Vaughn watched through high-powered binoculars as Bradley emerged from the hangar, shouting into his phone. Even from a distance, the panic in his body language was evident. "They're accelerating departure," Gabriella reported, requesting immediate clearance for takeoff. "Right on schedule," Vaughn replied, making his way toward the administrative building at the far end of the airfield. Unlike the hangar, this structure had minimal security, all attention focused on protecting the aircraft and its passengers. Inside, he moved silently through darkened corridors until he reached the communications room. The lone technician never saw him coming, a pressure point at the base of the neck, rendering him unconscious without injury. Vaughn locked the door and accessed the facility's internal systems. Within minutes, he had control of the airfield's communications, security cameras, and most importantly, the fuel management system for the Gulfstream. "All assets in position," came Gabriella's voice in his ear. "Understood. Go dark until extraction." Vaughn initiated the final sequence, triggering a cascading communications failure across the facility. As emergency protocols activated, the security team's attention divided between the perceived external threat and securing their principal's escape. Through the surveillance system, Vaughn watched Bradley and Natalie being hustled toward the waiting aircraft, surrounded by protective detail. Bradley looked shell-shocked, while Natalie maintained her composure, scanning the surroundings with practiced vigilance. Just before they reached the aircraft, federal helicopters appeared over the horizon, their spotlights cutting through the darkness. The timing was perfect, the result of anonymous tips about illegal weapons and human trafficking operations at the supposedly civilian airfield. Chaos erupted below as Obsidian personnel scrambled to respond to the unexpected development. Bradley and Natalie were rushed back toward the vehicles while guards took defensive positions. In the confusion, no one noticed the figure moving through the shadows toward the main hangar. No one except Natalie, who broke away from her security detail and pursued, drawing a concealed weapon from beneath her jacket. Inside the darkened hangar, Vaughn worked quickly, placing small charges at strategic points around the fuel reserves. Not enough to cause catastrophic damage, just sufficient to ensure the aircraft wouldn't be taking anyone to South America tonight or any other night. "I should have known," came Natalie's voice from behind him. "The others underestimated you. I warned them." Vaughn turned slowly to face his ex-wife, noting the 9mm pistol aimed steadily at his chest. "You always were the smarter one. This won't end well for you," Natalie said, maintaining her distance. "Even if you manage to bring down Obsidian, others will take its place. The same people who protected Theodore all these years will find new assets to control." "Maybe," Vaughn acknowledged, "but they won't have my daughter." Something shifted in Natalie's expression, a flash of genuine emotion breaking through her operational facade. "I do love her, Vaughn. Whatever else was false, that never was. And yet you were prepared to take her away forever, to raise her in a world of criminals and killers." "I was protecting her," Natalie insisted. "You don't understand what these people are capable of." "I understand perfectly," Vaughn replied. "That's why I've spent the last 3 days systematically dismantling their entire operation. Bank accounts frozen, identities compromised, safe houses exposed. By morning, there will be nothing left of Obsidian or anyone connected to it." Fear flashed across Natalie's features. "You can't have reached everyone. The organization is too extensive." "I didn't have to," Vaughn said. "I just had to create enough chaos and uncertainty to turn them against each other. The rest is happening on its own. Your father already offered testimony against Bradley in exchange for witness protection. And Bradley, well, The files I sent to the FBI contained enough to ensure he'll spend the rest of his life in a Supermax facility. The distant sound of gunfire erupted outside, federal agents engaging with the Obsidian security team. "It's over," Natalie Vaughn said. "The only question is whether you'll be arrested as an accomplice or eliminated as a liability. Because those are the only options Obsidian's real controllers will leave you." Uncertainty crept into Natalie's eyes. "There's always another option, like shooting me and escaping in the confusion," Vaughn suggested. "It won't work. This entire conversation is being recorded and transmitted to federal authorities. Kill me, and you'll never see Lily again." The mention of their daughter caused Natalie's aim to waver. "Where is she? Is she really safe? Safer than she ever was with you?" Something broke in Natalie then, the calculated operative giving way to a mother's desperation. "I never wanted this for her. You have to believe that. When they told me to target you, to create a relationship as cover, it was just an assignment. I never expected to have a child, to build a life that felt real." Vaughn finished for her. Natalie nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "Theodore has controlled my life since I was 17. After my mother died, he brought me into his world piece by piece. By the time I understood what it really was, I was already implicated in too many operations to escape." The gunfire outside intensified, moving closer to the hangar. "You have one chance," Vaughn said, his voice hardening. "Put down the gun and turn yourself in. Cooperate fully with the authorities. If you do that, if you help dismantle what remains of this organization, I'll make sure Lily knows you tried to do the right thing in the end." Natalie's hand trembled, the weapon becoming heavy in her grip. "They'll kill me in custody. Make it look like suicide, just like Portia." "Not if you have leverage," Vaughn countered, removing a flash drive from his pocket. "Names, dates, offshore account for the people above Theodore and Bradley. The ones who really control Obsidian. Insurance to keep you alive." Hope flickered across Natalie's face. "You do that? After everything?" "Not for you," Vaughn clarified. "For Lily. So she'll know her mother wasn't completely lost." The hangar doors crashed open, federal agents flooding in with weapons raised, shouting commands. Natalie looked from them to Vaughn, then slowly lowered her weapon and placed it on the ground. As agents moved to secure her, she locked eyes with Vaughn one last time. "Tell Lily I'm sorry. Tell her." Her voice broke. "Tell her I did love her. That was never a lie." Vaughn watched impassively as Natalie was led away, her words echoing in his mind. Outside, Bradley was already in custody, his face contorted with rage as agents secured him in a transport vehicle. The elaborate criminal enterprise that had destroyed Vaughn's marriage and threatened his daughter was collapsing in real time all around him. Yet victory felt hollow. In dismantling the threat to Lily, he had also demolished the foundations of her life, exposing her mother as a fraud, her grandfather as a criminal, her stepfather as a dangerous operative. The truth, necessary as it was, would leave scars that might never fully heal. As dawn broke over the airfield, Vaughn stood alone amidst the aftermath of his vengeance, the weight of what came next settling heavily upon him. The battle was won, but the war to give Lily a normal life was just beginning. And somewhere in the chaos, Malcolm Reeves had slipped away, the one loose and Vaughn couldn't account for. A dangerous enemy, now driven by personal vendetta rather than professional assignment. The game had changed, but it wasn't over. Chapter 7. Ashes and Shadows. 3 months after the dramatic raid at the airfield, Vaughn sat in the office of Assistant U.S. Attorney Sophia Mendez, reviewing the latest developments in the case against Obsidian Solutions Group and its principals. "Theodore Keller's testimony has been extensive," Mendez said, sliding a file across her desk. "With his cooperation, we've identified 7 other financial institutions involved in laundering Obsidian funds. The investigation has expanded to 3 continents." "And Bradley?" Vaughn asked, using the name he still associated with his daughter's former stepfather, though the man now answered to his real identity, Preston Rayburn. "Refusing to cooperate. His attorneys are pursuing an aggressive defense, claiming he was an unwitting participant manipulated by Keller." Mendez's expression made clear her opinion of this strategy. With the evidence he provided, plus Natalie's testimony, he's facing multiple life sentences regardless. Natalie, even after everything, her name still evoked complicated emotions. She remained in federal custody, her cooperation ensuring protection from both prosecution and the remnants of Obsidian seeking to silence her. Have there been any credible threats against her? Vaughn asked. Mendez nodded grimly. 2 attempts in the first month. We've since moved her to a more secure facility under a different identity. The information she's providing about Obsidian's government contracts has made some very powerful people nervous. Any sign of Malcolm Reeves? Nothing concrete. Intelligence suggests he may have fled to Eastern Europe, but that's unconfirmed. He's resourceful, and now he has a personal vendetta against you. Vaughn had expected as much. Reeves wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, especially such a public and comprehensive one. We can offer you witness protection, Mendez said, not for the first time. You and your daughter, new identities, relocation. Lily needs stability, not another upheaval, Vaughn replied. And I won't spend my life looking over my shoulder. Reeves will surface eventually. When he does, I'll be ready. After leaving the prosecutor's office, Vaughn drove to his sister Renee's suburban home, where Lily had been staying while he established their new life. The custody situation had been resolved definitively in his favor, given Natalie's circumstances, but he knew the emotional wounds would take much longer to heal. He found Lily in the backyard, helping her aunt plant flowers in the garden. Her face lit up when she saw him, and she raced across the lawn to fling herself into his arms. Dad, did you bring it? Did you? Vaughn smiled, the weight of the past months momentarily lifting. Bring what? I don't remember promising anything. Dad, Lily protested, seeing through his teasing. You promised. The puppy. Oh, that? Vaughn said, pretending to suddenly remember. Well, as it happens. He gestured toward his sister, who was walking around the side of the house with a squirming golden retriever puppy in her arms. Lily's squeal of delight was worth every moment of the nightmare they'd endured. As she raced to meet her new companion, Renee approached her brother. You're spoiling her, she observed, though her tone held no criticism. She deserves some joy after everything she's been through, Vaughn replied, watching as Lily and the puppy tumbled together on the grass. How's the new place coming along? Final security installation tomorrow, then we're clear to move in. Renee studied her brother's face. You really think he'll come for you? Reeves, it's not a question of if, only when, Vaughn replied quietly. But I've taken precautions. The new house is as secure as a government facility, with escape routes and panic rooms. I've engaged round-the-clock surveillance. When he makes his move, we'll be ready. And Lily? How much does she understand about what happened? Vaughn sighed. The child psychologist said to be honest but age-appropriate. She knows her mother did some bad things and is helping the police now. She knows Bradley wasn't who he pretended to be. The rest we'll address when she's older. The conversation paused as Lily ran over to show them how the puppy already knew how to sit on command. After she returned to playing, Renee spoke again. And Natalie? Will Lily ever see her again? That's up to the federal marshals and witness security, Vaughn replied. And ultimately, it will be Lily's decision when she's old enough to make it. That evening, after tucking Lily into bed at Renee's house, Vaughn drove to the new home he'd purchased, a modernist structure on a hilltop with clear sight lines in all directions. The extensive security system alerted him to a potential intrusion at the perimeter, but verification showed only a deer passing through the wooded area behind the property. Inside, he checked each room methodically, a habit from his years in high-risk security work. The house was empty, yet he couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Intuition or paranoia. In his line of work, the difference had often meant survival. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. She has her eyes. Central Park Playground. Yellow jacket. Tuesday, 3 p.m. Vaughn's blood ran cold. Attached was a photo of Lily at her school, taken earlier that day. He immediately called his surveillance team, demanding to know how someone had gotten close enough for the photo. Their confusion and assurances that the school perimeter had been secure offered no comfort. The message could only have come from Malcolm Reeves. Somehow, despite all precautions, he had reached Lily's school. The implied threat was clear: I can get to her anytime. Vaughn considered his options. The specified meeting was obviously a trap, yet ignoring it would only embolden Reeves. Reporting it to federal authorities would trigger protective measures that might drive Reeves deeper underground without neutralizing the threat. No, this would end only one way: a direct confrontation on terms Vaughn could control. He would attend the meeting, but not in the way Reeves expected. Over the next 3 days, Vaughn made meticulous preparations. Lily and Renee were relocated to a secure facility known only to him. His most trusted former colleagues were positioned strategically around Central Park, creating an invisible security net. Every possible ambush point was identified and countered. When Tuesday arrived, Vaughn approached the playground from an unexpected direction, having altered his appearance with subtle but effective changes. From his position, he had clear sight lines to the playground where children played under parents' watchful eyes. At precisely 3 p.m., a man in a yellow jacket sat on a bench facing the playground. Not Reeves. His build and movement patterns were wrong. A proxy sent to make initial contact or confirm Vaughn's presence. Through his earpiece, Vaughn received confirmation from his team: Yellow Jacket is clean. No weapons. Carrying a mobile phone and what appears to be an envelope, Vaughn approached cautiously, taking a seat beside the man while maintaining awareness of his surroundings. He said you'd come, the man said without looking at Vaughn. Said you wouldn't risk your daughter. Where is he? Not here. The man slid the envelope across the bench. He said to give you this. Said it explains everything. As Vaughn reached for the envelope, his instincts screamed a warning. He pulled back just as the man's hand moved to his pocket with unnatural speed. The next moments unfolded in horrifying clarity. Vaughn knocked the man's arm aside as he withdrew not a weapon, but a syringe. The momentum carried the needle into the man's own thigh, and his eyes widened in shock and terror. Help! The man gasped, his face already contorting. He said it wouldn't hurt you. Said it was just to make you sleep. Within seconds, the man began convulsing, drawing screams from nearby parents who grabbed their children and fled. Vaughn's security team converged, establishing a perimeter as the man's body went rigid, then still. The entire incident had been orchestrated not to kill Vaughn, but to send a message and to eliminate the messenger, leaving no connection to Reeves. Inside the envelope was a single photograph. Natalie in her witness protection location, reading a newspaper with yesterday's date clearly visible. Scrawled across the image were the words, "She's next. Then you. Then Lily will be alone. Just like you were." The reference to Vaughn's orphan childhood confirmed Reeves had accessed his complete background. This wasn't just revenge. It was psychological warfare designed to systematically destroy everything Vaughn valued before coming for him directly. As federal authorities took over the scene, Vaughn stepped away, making a call to Assistant U.S. Attorney Mendez. Reeves has compromised Natalie's location, he said without preamble. Move her immediately. Full security protocol. How could he possibly? He has sources inside your operation. Vaughn cut her off. Someone with access to witness security. Trust no one until you identify the leak. After ending the call, Vaughn made a decision. Defensive measures were no longer sufficient. To protect Lily and end this threat permanently, he would need to take the fight directly to Malcolm Reeves, wherever he was hiding. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Chapter 8. Predator and Prey. The abandoned steel mill stood silhouetted against the night sky, its skeletal structure a monument to industrial decay. Rain pelted the rusted metal, creating an eerie percussion that masked Vaughn's approach through the surrounding wetlands. 72 hours of relentless pursuit had led to this moment. After the Central Park incident, Vaughn had activated a network of contacts stretching from former intelligence operatives to underground information brokers. The trail had led first to a safe house in Newark, then to a money transfer in Philadelphia, and finally to this desolate location 20 miles outside Pittsburgh. According to his intelligence, Malcolm Reeves had established a temporary base of operations here, gathering resources and personnel for what would likely be his endgame move against Vaughn and potentially Natalie. Thermal imaging from a drone pass had confirmed 4 heat signatures inside the main structure. One stationary in what had once been the administrative office, the others patrolling in rotating patterns. Security cameras had been positioned at strategic points around the perimeter, but the recent storm had created power fluctuations that Vaughn could exploit. He approached the east access point during a calculated power dip, using the momentary camera blindness to breach the outer fence. Inside the complex, he moved like a ghost between massive, rusting machinery, his progress deliberate and unhurried. Rushing would create mistakes, and against an opponent like Reeves, a single mistake would be fatal. The first sentry fell silently, a precise sleeper hold rendering him unconscious before he could alert his companions. Vaughn zip-tied the man's hands and feet, then secured him in a drainage culvert, alive but contained. The second guard proved more challenging, his movement pattern less predictable than initial surveillance had suggested. Vaughn was forced to remain motionless behind a collapsed conveyor belt for 18 minutes, rain soaking through his tactical gear, before an opportunity presented itself. Again, he opted for non-lethal neutralization, a decision that wasn't born of mercy but calculation. Bodies created complications and investigations. Unconscious guards could be questioned later. As he approached the administrative building, Vaughn detected the faint blue glow of electronics through the grime-covered windows. Reeves would have established a command center, likely with surveillance feeds and communications equipment. The third guard would be positioned to protect this resource. Rather than risk a frontal approach, Vaughn circled to the roof access, using the external fire escape that groaned treacherously under his weight. The sound was mostly masked by the continuing storm, but he froze when lightning illuminated the area, making him potentially visible to anyone watching. No alarm was raised. He continued to the roof and located the access hatch, carefully testing it for booby traps before proceeding. The interior was pitch black, requiring night vision to navigate the maze of collapsed ceiling panels and rotting office furniture. Below, he could hear voices, a low murmur that suggested at least 2 individuals in conversation. He positioned himself above a ceiling vent that offered both visual and auditory intelligence. Confirmed the leak has been identified and neutralized, a voice was saying, "Not Reeves, but someone reporting to him. Federal marshals have moved the woman to a new location. We've lost that track for now." "It doesn't matter," came Reeves' distinctive voice, cold and precise. "Mercer is the priority. Once he's eliminated, we can locate the woman and the child at our leisure. The team from Belgrade arrives tomorrow. 6 operators, fully equipped." "We don't wait," Reeves replied. "Mercer's already hunting us. He's proven more resourceful than anticipated. You think he's found this location?" A pause. "It's possible. Enhance perimeter surveillance and activate the secondary security protocols." Vaughn had heard enough. Reeves was expanding his operation, bringing in additional mercenaries for what appeared to be a major offensive. The timetable had accelerated. He needed to end this now, before reinforcements arrived. Moving silently along the ceiling joists, he positioned himself above what appeared to be Reeves' command center. Through gaps in the deteriorating ceiling, he could see computer equipment, weapons, and tactical gear. Reeves sat at a central desk, studying something on a monitor, while his subordinate, a younger man with military bearing, checked surveillance feeds on a separate screen. Vaughn considered his options. A direct assault would be high risk, especially if Reeves had prepared contingencies. But allowing him to continue gathering resources would only make the eventual confrontation more dangerous. The decision was made for him when an alarm suddenly blared from the younger man's console. "Perimeter breach, south quadrant," he reported, reaching for a weapon. Thermal imaging shows a single intruder. On the surveillance screen, Vaughn could see a figure moving through the complex, a deliberate distraction created by one of his own team members right on schedule. "Hendricks, investigate," Reeves ordered. "Maintain communication." Could be local scavengers, could be something else. As the younger man exited, Vaughn prepared to make his move. Reeves, now alone, activated additional security measures, his attention divided between surveillance feeds and what appeared to be evacuation preparations. The ceiling gave way with a controlled crash as Vaughn dropped into the room, landing in a combat-ready stance with his weapon trained on Reeves, who showed no surprise at the intrusion. Calculated risk, Reeves commented, slowly raising his hands. Entering the lion's den directly. Enter the line, Reeves, Vaughn replied, keeping a safe distance. Your operation is compromised. Federal tactical teams are en route. Are they? Reeves smiled thinly. Or are you here alone, driven by personal vendetta rather than professional judgment? The Vaughn Mercer I studied wouldn't risk a sanctioned operation with his daughter's safety at stake. The Vaughn Mercer you studied doesn't exist anymore, Vaughn replied coldly. You in Obsidian saw to that when you destroyed my life and threatened my child. Reeves gave a small shrug. Collateral damage in a larger operation. Nothing personal until you made it so. Sending assassins after my daughter made it personal. Insurance policy, Reeves corrected. A rational strategy you would have employed in my position. We're not so different, you and I. Both trained to assess threats and eliminate them efficiently. The difference, Vaughn said, is that I don't target children. A tense silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sound of the alarm still blaring across the complex. What's your endgame here, Mercer? Reeves finally asked. Kill me? Turn me over to authorities? Neither resolves your situation. There are others who will continue what I started. People who consider your knowledge of Obsidian operations an unacceptable liability. I've already dismantled Obsidian, Vaughn replied. Your principals are under indictment or in witness protection. Your offshore accounts are frozen. There's nothing left to protect. Something shifted in Reeves' expression, the first hint of genuine emotion breaking through his professional facade. There's always something left. Always loose ends to eliminate. That's why we're both here, isn't it? To tie up the final loose end in this operation. The radio on Reeves' desk crackled. No sign of the intruder. Possible false alarm from wildlife. Continuing perimeter sweep. Reeves' gaze flickered briefly toward the desk, a momentary tell that Vaughn recognized from years of high-stakes confrontations. There was something on that desk beyond the radio, something Reeves considered a potential game-changer. Hands on your head, Vaughn commanded, moving to secure Reeves while maintaining awareness of potential threats. Kneel, facing away from the desk. Reeves complied with deliberate slowness. You're making a mistake, Mercer. I'm offering you a way out. For you and your daughter. A permanent resolution. The only resolution is ending the threat you pose, Vaughn replied, securing Reeves' hands behind his back with reinforced zip ties. Whatever you're planning dies here. Once Reeves was restrained, Vaughn approached the desk cautiously, keeping his weapon trained on his prisoner. What he found sent a chill through him, detailed surveillance photos of Lily at her new school, at Renee's house, even in the supposedly secure facility where he'd relocated them. More disturbing were architectural plans of the building, with security systems marked and potential entry points highlighted. How did you get these? Vaughn demanded, fighting to keep his voice steady. Professional courtesy, Reeves replied with a cold smile. A demonstration of capability. Those photos were taken this morning. Your security measures have already been compromised. My team has established access protocols for when the moment comes. What moment? When I give the order, Reeves said simply, or when I fail to check in at designated intervals. Dead man switch, Mercer. Standard contingency planning. Kill me, imprison me. Either way, protocols activate. Vaughn felt the familiar ice of combat clarity settling over him. If Reeves was telling the truth, and his operational history suggested he would have such contingencies, then simply neutralizing him wouldn't resolve the threat to Lily. What do you want? Vaughn asked, already knowing the answer. Professional resolution, Reeves replied. You disappear permanently. No further pursuit of Obsidian interests or personnel. In exchange, your daughter lives undisturbed. And I'm supposed to trust your word? Trust operational logic, Reeves countered. With you gone, your daughter presents no intelligence risk. Eliminating her creates complications without strategic benefit. My principals are pragmatists, not sadists. The building suddenly shook with an explosion from the south perimeter, Vaughn's extraction team creating a diversion as planned. Alarms blared with renewed urgency. Reeves remained unnaturally calm. Limited time frame now, Mercer. Decision point. Your life for your daughter's safety. The offer expires when reinforcements arrive, for either of us. In the flickering emergency lights, Vaughn studied the man who had become his nemesis. Reeves was a professional, ruthless but rational. If he gave his word on operational grounds, he would likely keep it, if only because breaking it would be inefficient. But there was something in Reeves' eyes, a calculating anticipation that triggered Vaughn's instincts. This was too convenient, too neat a resolution. Show me the dead man's switch, Vaughn demanded. Prove it exists. Reeves nodded toward a laptop on the side table. Access code is Theta 97 Victor. Check the automated protocols folder. Maintaining his weapon's aim, Vaughn accessed the system, finding exactly what Reeves had described. A sophisticated protocol requiring regular authentication to prevent automated execution of pre-programmed commands. The target coordinates matched Lily's location. What Reeves couldn't know was that Vaughn had already moved Lily again after detecting unexplained surveillance activity near the secure facility. The coordinates targeted an empty location. Satisfied? Reeves asked. Almost, Vaughn replied, closing the laptop. One more thing. Without warning, he struck Reeves with precise force at the base of the skull, rendering him unconscious. Working quickly, he accessed Reeves' communication devices, downloading all data to an encrypted drive. The information would allow him to identify and neutralize the remaining threats in Reeves' network. The building shook with another explosion, closer this time. Extraction was imminent. Vaughn looked down at Reeves' unconscious form, considering his options. Killing him would be the simplest solution, permanent elimination of the threat. But it would also mean crossing a line Vaughn had maintained throughout his career, even during the darkest operations. Instead, he placed an anonymous call to federal authorities, providing the location and evidence of Reeves' activities. Obsidian was already under federal investigation. Its head of security would face justice through legal channels. Before departing, Vaughn left a single item beside Reeves, a chess piece. A black king toppled on its side, the universal symbol of checkmate. As extraction helicopters approached, Vaughn disappeared into the night, carrying with him the means to end the threat to his daughter once and for all. The predator had become the prey, and the hunt was finally over. Chapter 9. Unforgiving. 1 year later, Vaughn stood on the deck of his new home in northern Michigan, watching as Lily played with her dog in the sprawling yard that sloped down to a private lake. Autumn had painted the surrounding forests in brilliant red and gold, creating a postcard-perfect setting that seemed worlds away from the darkness they'd escaped. The final dismantling of Malcolm Reeves' network had taken months of meticulous work. The data extracted from his systems had revealed a complex web of operatives, safe houses, and contingency plans, all of which Vaughn had systematically neutralized with the reluctant assistance of federal authorities. Reeves himself had been sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, his trial conducted under unusual security measures given the sensitive nature of Obsidian's government connections. Theodore Keller had received a reduced sentence in exchange for his comprehensive testimony, while Bradley/Preston faced multiple consecutive life terms. Natalie remained in witness protection, her cooperation continuing to unravel the international aspects of Obsidian's operations. According to Mendez, she asked about Lily regularly, though no direct contact had been established. That decision remained in Vaughn's hands, and so far, he had chosen to maintain distance, not out of cruelty, but concern for Lily's emotional well-being. The child psychologist had advised a gradual approach to reintroducing Natalie into Lily's life, if at all. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted his thoughts. A government-issue SUV approached along the private drive, parking near the front entrance. Assistant U.S. Attorney Mendez emerged, looking more casual than Vaughn had ever seen her in jeans and a light jacket. "Mr. Mercer," she greeted him as he came around from the deck. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "You said it was important," Vaughn replied, leading her inside the house where Lily couldn't overhear. Has something happened with Reeves? Not Reeves, Mendez said, accepting the coffee he offered. Natalie. She's been insisting on seeing Lily, becoming quite adamant about it. Vaughn's expression hardened. The court granted me sole custody with visitation at my discretion. Nothing has changed. Legally, no, Mendez agreed. But she's making formal requests through official channels now. Given her continued cooperation, some in the Justice Department are sympathetic. And you? Mendez sighed. I'm here as a courtesy, Vaughn, to warn you that pressure may be coming. Natalie has powerful advocates now. People who see her as instrumental in bringing down a significant national security threat. She was part of that threat, Vaughn reminded her. She helped create it, under duress, according to her testimony. The coercion angle has gained traction with the courts. Vaughn stared out the window at Lily, considering the implications. What does she want exactly? Supervised visitation to start. Eventually, shared custody once her situation stabilizes. No, the word was simple, final. She forfeited that right when she planned to disappear with Lily as part of a criminal enterprise, when she allowed my daughter to be used as leverage in their operations. She claimed she was protecting Lily from worse alternatives, Mendez said, that Theodore threatened both of them if she didn't comply with his plans. And her initial targeting of me, her false marriage, was that protection too? Mendez had no answer for that. I need you to understand something, Vaughn continued, his voice quiet but intense. I've forgiven many things in my life. Betrayals, injuries, even attempts on my life. But I will never, never forgive anyone who endangers my child. Natalie crossed that line. So did Theodore. So did Bradley. There is no coming back from that. The courts may not see it that way, Mendez warned. They tend to favor maternal relationships when possible. Let me be perfectly clear, Vaughn said, leaning forward. If the courts attempt to force this issue, I will release everything I have on Obsidian's government connections. Every contract, every operation, every official who looked the other way. The complete data set that I extracted from Reeves systems, but never fully disclosed to your department. Mendez paled slightly. That would compromise ongoing cases, jeopardize national security. Then I suggest you make that clear to whoever is advocating for Natalie, Vaughn replied. My priority is my daughter's safety and well-being. Nothing else matters. After Mendez departed, Vaughn remained in his study, reviewing the extensive security measures that protected their new home. The property was registered under a corporate entity with no connection to his name. Their electronic footprint was minimal, their movements unpredictable. He had created a fortress, not of walls and alarms, but of anonymity and strategic precaution. Lily's laughter drifted through the open window as she played with her friend from the neighboring property, the first real friendship she developed since the upheaval. The child psychologist had reported significant progress in her emotional recovery, noting that the stability of their new life was helping her process the traumatic events of the past. That evening, as he tucked Lily into bed, she asked the question she occasionally revisited. Dad, will I ever see Mom again? Vaughn sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. Your mom is still helping the police with some very important work. It makes it difficult for her to visit right now. But someday, when you're older, you'll have choices about that, he said truthfully. And I'll support whatever you decide. Lily considered this, her young face thoughtful. Bradley wasn't a good person, was he? No, he wasn't. And Grandpa Theodore? Vaughn sighed. He made some very bad decisions that hurt a lot of people. What about Mom? Did she make bad decisions too? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications beyond Lily's understanding. Vaughn had promised never to lie to his daughter, even when the truth was difficult. Yes, he said finally. She did, but she's trying to make better ones now. This seemed to satisfy Lily, who nodded solemnly before changing the subject to her upcoming science project. After finishing their bedtime routine, Vaughn kissed her forehead and turned out the light, leaving the door slightly ajar, as she preferred. In his study, he opened the secure laptop that maintained his monitoring systems. The regular status reports from his security team showed no unusual activity around their perimeter or in the digital surveillance of potential threats. Natalie remained at her witness protection location in Arizona. Malcolm Reeves remained in maximum security at ADX Florence. Theodore Keller was serving his reduced sentence at a medium security facility in Pennsylvania. The final screen showed a real-time location ping from Bradley/Preston's prison transport, currently en route to a federal courthouse for an appeal hearing. The tracking device had been planted by one of Vaughn's contacts in the Marshal's Service, providing an extra layer of security that official channels wouldn't offer. As he was about to close the laptop, an alert flashed on the screen, an unexpected deviation in the transport route. The vehicle had turned onto a secondary road, away from the designated secure path to the courthouse. Vaughn immediately activated enhanced tracking, watching as the transport continued along isolated country roads. This wasn't a standard route change. It was completely off protocol. He made a quick call to his contact in the Marshal's Service, who promised to investigate immediately. Within minutes, the response came back. No authorized route change had been logged. The transport wasn't responding to communication attempts. Vaughn watched the tracking screen with growing apprehension as the transport came to a stop in a remote area. The signal remained stationary for 17 minutes, then began moving again, but at a much higher speed and in the opposite direction. An hour later, the news broke across emergency channels. A federal prisoner transport had been attacked by unknown assailants. 2 marshals dead. The prisoner, Preston Rayburn, formerly known as Bradley Hoffman, missing and presumed extracted by the attackers. Vaughn's security protocols activated automatically. Additional personnel deployed to the perimeter of his property. Surveillance drones launched to monitor the surrounding area. Evacuation vehicles prepared for immediate departure if necessary. But even as these measures unfolded, Vaughn knew they were likely unnecessary. This wasn't about him or Lily, not directly. This was about Obsidian protecting its interests. Bradley/Preston knew too much, had been too deeply embedded in their operations. His testimony, should he choose to provide it, could implicate figures far beyond those already exposed. His extraction wasn't an attack on Vaughn. It was damage control by powers that remained in the shadows. Still, prudence demanded preparation. Vaughn sent a coded message to Renee, activating their emergency protocols. Within 30 minutes, she arrived to stay with Lily while he addressed the potential threat. "Is it happening again?" Renee asked quietly as they stood in the kitchen, out of Lily's earshot. "Precautionary measures only," Vaughn assured her. "I don't believe we're targeted, but I need to verify." For the next 3 days, Vaughn worked tirelessly, leveraging every contact and resource to track Bradley/Preston's extraction team. The trail led through 3 states before going cold at a private airfield in New Mexico, a familiar pattern suggesting the same networks that had nearly helped Natalie and Bradley escape a year earlier. Analysis of communication patterns and financial transactions confirmed his initial assessment. This was an internal Obsidian matter. Bradley had been extracted not to pursue vengeance against Vaughn, but to prevent further exposure of Obsidian's government connections. As the immediate threat assessment downgraded, Vaughn maintained enhanced security but allowed life to return to relative normalcy. Lily resumed school, their daily routines continued, and the autumn days passed in a rhythm that offered healing and stability. 2 weeks after Bradley's extraction, Vaughn received an encrypted message from a source deep within federal intelligence circles. Rayburn terminated. Obsidian protocols. File closed. The message confirmed what Vaughn had suspected. Bradley had been eliminated by his own organization, a loose end tied permanently. The threat he might have posed, either as a witness or as an enemy, was neutralized. That evening, as Lily recounted her day's adventures over dinner, Vaughn found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The facade of his marriage had crumbled, revealing a complex conspiracy that had nearly destroyed everything he valued. Yet from those ashes, he had forged something new, a life defined not by deception, but by clarity of purpose and unyielding protective resolve. He had never been a forgiving man. Those who betrayed him, who threatened what he loved, found no mercy in his response. Natalie had discovered this truth. Theodore had learned it from his prison cell. Bradley had understood it in his final moments, executed by the very organization he had served. And should anyone else ever threaten Lily's safety or happiness, they would discover the same immutable fact. Von Mercer's vengeance was as patient as it was absolute, as methodical as it was merciless. But for now, listening to his daughter's laughter echoing through their home, Von allowed himself to embrace the peace they had earned. The demons had been vanquished, the shadows dispelled. The future stretched before them, not unmarked by the past, but no longer defined by it. In this moment, at least they were safe. And for Von Mercer, unforgiving protector, ruthless advocate, devoted father, that was enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Patriarch's Pride. Brian Buchanan stood in his mahogany-paneled study, adjusting the silver cufflinks that had belonged to his father. At 72, he carried himself with the bearing of a man who had built an empire from nothing. His weathered hands, scarred from years of construction work before he became one of Chicago's most influential real estate developers, now held a crystal tumbler of aged whiskey. The walls around him told the story of 5 decades in business. Framed photos with mayors, senators, and industry titans. Certificates from charitable organizations lined one wall, testament to the millions he donated over the years. But tonight, his eyes lingered on a different collection. Family photos spanning 3 generations of Buchanans. His wife Helen entered quietly, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the late hour. After 48 years of marriage, she could read his moods like a barometer reading storm clouds. "You're thinking about tomorrow," she said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. Brian nodded, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. "Sally's engagement party. Hard to believe our little granddaughter is getting married." Helen's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Have you spoken to Chris about the guest list? I figured I'd leave the planning to him and Rebecca. It's their show." Brian set down his glass, studying his wife's face. "Why? Is there something I should know?" Before Helen could answer, the front door's heavy oak panels announced someone's arrival with an authoritative slam. Footsteps echoed through the marble foyer, expensive Italian leather on imported stone. Chris Buchanan, 45 years old and carrying himself with the entitled swagger of someone who'd never known real struggle, appeared in the doorway. "Dad, we need to talk," Chris said without preamble, his voice carrying that particular tone Brian had learned to despise, the one that emerged whenever his son wanted something. Brian gestured to the chair beside Helen. "Sit. Your mother and I were just discussing Sally's engagement party." Chris remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back in a pose Brian recognized from his own business negotiations. The apple, it seemed, had fallen close enough to the tree to pick up a few tricks, even if it had rolled downhill afterward. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss," Chris began, his voice taking on a measured cadence he used when delivering what he considered difficult news. "Rebecca and I have been thinking about the wedding planning, and we've decided to keep things intimate." Helen's teacup rattled against its saucer as she set it down. Brian's expression remained neutral, but his fingers tightened around his whiskey glass. "Intimate how?" Brian asked. "Well, you know how these things can get out of hand. Sally's fiancé, Shane Shannon, comes from a prominent family. His father runs Shannon Construction. You probably know Hugo Shannon from the Chamber of Commerce. The Shannon family has expectations about how things should be handled." Brian knew Hugo Shannon well. The man ran a mid-level construction company that occasionally subcontracted work from Buchanan Enterprises. Competent enough, but hardly in the same league as the empire Brian had built. I'm not following your point, son. Chris shifted uncomfortably. The thing is, Shane's family is very traditional. They believe weddings should be, well, they have specific ideas about guest lists. Family only. Immediate family. The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuff candle. Helen's face had gone pale, and Brian felt a familiar cold sensation settling in his stomach. The same feeling he'd experienced 40 years ago when he discovered his first business partner try and cheat him. "Are you telling me," Brian said slowly, "that Helen and I aren't invited to our granddaughter's wedding?" "Dad, it's not personal." "Answer the question, Chris." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Chris's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. The Shannon family has made it clear that they want to limit the guest list to immediate family only. Sally's parents, Rebecca and me, and Shane's parents. That's it. Brian set his whiskey glass down with deliberate precision. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority that had once made grown men in boardrooms fall silent. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Sally, my granddaughter, whom I've loved and supported for 22 years, whose college education I funded, whose first car I bought, this Sally has decided that her grandfather and grandmother shouldn't witness her wedding day. Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. And you, my son, who grew up in a house I built, who attended private schools I paid for, who works at a company I started, you came here tonight to deliver this message instead of Sally herself." Chris's composure began to crack. "It's not like that, Dad. Sally loves you and Mom. This is just about keeping things simple." Brian stood slowly, his 6'2" frame still imposing despite his age. "Simple. I see. And tell me, Chris, does this simplicity extend to other areas? Will the reception be simple too? The flowers? The venue? Well, actually, we've booked the Grand Millennium downtown." The Grand Millennium. Brian's voice carried a note of interest that made Helen look up sharply. "Expensive choice. Hugo Shannon's construction company must be doing better than I thought." Chris's face flushed. "Shane's family is handling most of the expenses." "Most of them?" "Well, Rebecca and I are contributing what we can, with money from your salary at my company." The truth hung between them like a blade. Chris worked as a vice president at Buchanan Enterprises, a position he'd held for 15 years despite showing little aptitude for the real estate business. His six-figure salary was more charity than earned income, a fact that everyone in the family understood but never discussed. "Dad, I know you're upset." "Upset?" Brian's voice remained dangerously quiet. "Son, I haven't begun to show you upset." He walked to his desk and pulled out a leather-bound checkbook, the gold pen moving across the paper with swift, practiced strokes. He tore off the check and held it out to Chris. "What's this?" Chris asked, taking the paper. "A wedding gift. For Sally. $25,000. Chris's eyes widened as he looked at the amount. "Dad, this is incredibly generous. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just give it to Sally with my love." Brian's smile was thin and cold. "After all, it's the least I can do for a granddaughter who values family so much that she wants to keep her wedding simple." Helen had been watching this exchange with growing alarm. She knew that smile, had seen it before when Brian was preparing to destroy a business rival who had underestimated him. "Brian," she said carefully, "maybe we should all sleep on this. Emotions are running high." "You're absolutely right, dear," Brian said, his voice suddenly warm again. "Chris, thank your wife and Sally for thinking of us. I'm sure their simple, intimate wedding will be everything they dreamed of." Chris clutched the check, clearly relieved that the confrontation hadn't escalated further. "Thanks, Dad. I knew you'd understand. You've always been reasonable about these things." "Have I?" Brian asked. "Well, I suppose that's one way to look at it." After Chris left, Helen remained in her chair, studying her husband's face. "What are you thinking?" Brian returned to his desk and opened a different drawer, pulling out a cell phone that Helen didn't recognize. "I'm thinking," he said as he dialed a number, "that our son has forgotten exactly who he's dealing with." The call connected after 2 rings. "Kurt, it's Brian Buchanan. I hope I'm not calling too late." Good. Listen, I need a favor. Remember that situation we discussed last month with the Shannon Construction Company?" The permit issues? Yes, that's the one. I think it might be time to revisit those concerns. Helen watched her husband's face as he spoke, seeing the transformation from hurt grandfather to strategic businessman. Whatever Chris and Rebecca thought they were doing by excluding them from Sally's wedding, they had just made a critical error in judgment. Brian Buchanan hadn't built his empire by accepting slights quietly, and his son was about to learn that some lessons could only be taught the hard way. Chapter 2. The Setup. The next morning, Brian arrived at his downtown office before sunrise, as had been his custom for nearly 50 years. The 42nd floor of the Buchanan building offered a commanding view of Chicago's skyline, a testament to the empire he'd built from a single construction crew and an unshakable work ethic. His assistant, Pamela Gilmore, had been with him for 23 years and possessed the rare ability to anticipate his needs before he voiced them. She entered his office at exactly 7:30 a.m., carrying a silver tray with his usual black coffee and the morning's essential documents. "Good morning, Mr. Buchanan. Your 9 o'clock with the City Planning Committee has been moved to 10:30. Kurt Campbell called 3 times before 7 a.m. He said to tell you the Shannon matter is progressing nicely." Brian accepted his coffee with a nod. Kurt Campbell was Chicago's deputy building inspector, a man who owed his position to Brian's recommendation and his continued employment to Brian's ongoing influence. In a city where connections mattered more than credentials, Kurt understood the value of loyalty. What else? Darren Rose from Rose & Associates called about the Harbor Point development. The environmental impact study came back clean, and they're ready to move forward with the groundbreaking ceremony next month. Pamela continued through the morning's agenda, but Brian's mind was elsewhere, calculating moves and counter-moves like a chess grandmaster planning 20 steps ahead. The game had begun last night when his son delivered that ridiculous message about the wedding invitation. Now, it was time to establish the rules. At 10:15, Brian's private line rang. The caller ID showed a number he recognized immediately. "Hugo," Brian said, leaning back in his leather chair. "I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk soon." Hugo Shannon's voice carried its usual forced joviality. "Brian, good to hear from you, buddy. I've been meaning to call about that subcontracting opportunity you mentioned last month. My boys are ready to get started whenever you give the word." "About that, Hugo, I'm afraid there might be a small complication." The line went quiet for a moment. "What kind of complication?" "Well, it seems there are some questions about Shannon Construction's permit history. Nothing serious, I'm sure, but you know how the city gets about these things. They want everything squeaky clean before they approve new contracts." "Permit history?" "Brian, what are you talking about? We've never had permit issues." Brian opened the thick folder that Kurt Campbell had delivered an hour earlier. Inside were photocopies of permit applications, inspection reports, and violation notices dating back 5 years. "I'm looking at a report that shows 3 instances of work proceeding without proper electrical permits. 2 cases of exceeding approved square footage on residential additions. And there's this interesting note about a commercial project where the foundation work didn't match the approved specifications." "Those are old issues, Brian. Ancient history. Everything was resolved." "I'm sure it was. But you know how bureaucrats can be. They see a pattern and they start asking uncomfortable questions." Brian's voice carried sympathy that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, these things can usually be smoothed over with the right approach. A few phone calls to the right people." Hugo's breathing was audible over the phone. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything, Hugo. Just observing that permit issues can be expensive, time-consuming, the kind of thing that makes general contractors nervous about working with subcontractors who might have regulatory problems." The silence stretched long enough that Brian wondered if the call had dropped. "Is this about the wedding?" Hugo finally asked. "The wedding?" "Hugo, I don't know what you mean. Shane told me about the guest list situation." "Look, Brian, that wasn't my idea. My wife got some notion about keeping things small, and Rebecca Buchanan was right there agreeing with her. You know how women can be about these things." Brian smiled, though Hugo couldn't see it. "Hugo, I think you misunderstand me. I'm calling as one businessman to another, sharing information that might be relevant to our professional relationship. If you're having family celebrations, well, That's wonderful. I hope everyone has a lovely time. Brian, be straight with me. Are you going to blackball my company over a wedding invitation? Blackball? That's a strong word, Hugo. I prefer to think of it as being selective about business partnerships. After all, reputation is everything in this business. If questions arise about a subcontractor's regulatory compliance, well, that reflects on the general contractor too. Hugo's voice took on a pleading tone that Brian found distasteful but unsurprising. What do you want me to do? The invitations are already sent out. The venue is booked. Shane's already told his friends. Hugo, I want you to do whatever makes you comfortable. This is your family celebration. I would never presume to tell you how to handle your personal affairs. But the business implications will be whatever they need to be. Brian ended the call and immediately dialed another number. Floyd, it's Brian Buchanan. How's the family? Excellent. Listen, I need you to make a few calls for me. Shannon Construction. I need to know about their insurance coverage, their bonding capacity, and whether they've had any workers' compensation claims in the past 18 months. Floyd Kaiser ran a small but influential insurance brokerage that specialized in construction companies. In the interconnected world of Chicago business, information flowed through predictable channels, and Brian had spent decades building relationships with the people who controlled those channels. By noon, Brian had made 6 more calls. To the president of the Building Contractors Association, to the head of the Electrical Workers Union, to the owner of the largest construction supply company on the South Side. Each conversation was brief, professional, and seemingly innocuous. Each conversation also contained subtle questions about Shannon Construction's reliability, their financial stability, their commitment to safety standards. Nothing overt, nothing that could be traced back to Brian directly. Just the kind of casual inquiries that happened every day in the business world. By 1 o'clock, Hugo Shannon's phone was ringing constantly. At 1:30, Brian's intercom buzzed. Mr. Buchanan? I have Rebecca Buchanan online too. She sounds upset. Brian smiled and picked up the phone. Rebecca, what a pleasant surprise. Brian, what the hell are you doing? His daughter-in-law's voice was shaking with anger. Hugo Shannon just called Chris in a panic. He's talking about permits and inspections and business problems. This is about the wedding, isn't it? Rebecca, I'm not sure what you mean. I had a routine business conversation with Hugo this morning about some regulatory matters. These things happen all the time in the construction industry. Don't lie to me, Brian. I've known you for 20 years. You're punishing us because of the guest list. Brian's voice remained calm and professional. Rebecca, I think you overestimate my influence over city bureaucracy. If Hugo is having permit issues, that's between him and the building department. Bullshit. You know exactly what you're doing. I know that my granddaughter is getting married, and I want her to have the wedding she dreams of. A small, intimate affair, as Chris explained to me. I'm sure it will be perfect. Brian, please. This isn't about you and Helen. The Shannon family has very specific ideas about wedding traditions. They wanted to keep the ceremony small and have a larger reception later. This was news to Brian, but he filed it away without letting his surprise show in his voice. That sounds lovely. Very thoughtful of them to plan 2 celebrations. The point is, you and Helen were always going to be invited to the reception. This is just a misunderstanding. Rebecca, if there's been a misunderstanding, then I'm sure it will work itself out. In the meantime, please give Sally my love and tell her how excited Helen and I are to hear about her wedding plans. Even if we can't be there to witness the ceremony, we'll be thinking of her. Brian, I have a meeting starting, Rebecca. We'll talk soon. He hung up and immediately called Kurt Campbell. Kurt, Brian Buchanan. How are those Shannon construction files looking? Really? That's serious? Well, I suppose you'll need to follow proper procedure. When do you think the inspection team will need to visit their current job sites? Tomorrow? My goodness, that does seem urgent. Brian ended the call and sat back in his chair, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere out there, his granddaughter was planning a wedding that he wouldn't be invited to attend. Somewhere else, Hugo Shannon was beginning to understand the cost of that decision. The game was just beginning, and Brian Buchanan had always been very good at games. Chapter 3, Pressure Points. Sally Buchanan sat in her childhood bedroom, staring at her laptop screen through tears that blurred the wedding planning checklist she'd been working on for months. At 22, she possessed her grandfather's steel gray eyes and her grandmother's delicate features. But right now, she looked far younger than her years. Her mother, Rebecca, paced the room like a caged animal. Cell phone pressed her ear as she spoke in urgent whispers to someone on the other end. Sally caught fragments of the conversation. Complete disaster. And your father's lost his mind. And Shannon family is freaking out. When Rebecca ended the call, she turned to her daughter with an expression Sally had never seen before. Fear mixed with fury and something that looked almost like respect. Sally, honey, we need to talk. Mom, I heard you on the phone. What's happening with Shane's family? Mrs. Shannon called me 3 times this morning, but I was in class and couldn't answer. Rebecca sat on the bed beside her daughter, taking Sally's hands in hers. There are some complications with the wedding plans. It seems your grandfather is upset about not being invited to the ceremony. Sally's face crumpled. Mom, I never wanted to exclude Grandpa Brian and Grandma Helen. That was never my idea. Mrs. Shannon insisted that keeping the ceremony small was the proper way to do things, and you agreed. I know, sweetheart. I know. Rebecca's voice carried a weariness that made her sound older than her 43 years. But your grandfather doesn't see it that way. And when your grandfather gets upset, she trailed off, staring out the window at the manicured lawn that Brian had paid to have installed when Sally was 5 years old. What do you mean? Sally asked. Before Rebecca could answer, the landline rang. Sally answered it without thinking. Hello. Is this Sally Buchanan? The voice was unfamiliar, professional, and cold. Yes, this is Sally. Miss Buchanan, this is Craig Cardenas from Chicago Building Inspection Services. I'm calling regarding your upcoming wedding reception at the Grand Millennium Hotel. We've received some concerns about the venue's compliance with current fire safety regulations, and we'll need to conduct a full inspection before any large gatherings can be approved. Sally's stomach dropped. What kind of concerns? I can't discuss the specific nature of the complaint, but I will say that if we find any violations, the event will need to be canceled until all issues are resolved. The inspection is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The line went dead. Sally stared at the phone, her mind struggling to process what she'd just heard. Mom, she said in a small voice. I think Grandpa is really upset. Rebecca took the phone from her daughter's trembling hands. Oh, honey, he's more than upset. He's at war. An hour later, Shane Shannon arrived at the Buchanan house looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. His usually perfect blonde hair was disheveled, his designer shirt wrinkled, and his hands shook as he embraced Sally. This is insane, he said without preamble. My dad spent the morning fielding calls from contractors, suppliers, even his insurance company. Everyone's asking questions about permit compliance and safety violations. His biggest client just put their project on hold, pending review of regulatory issues. Rebecca and Sally exchanged glances. What exactly did they tell him? Rebecca asked. That's the crazy part. Nobody's accusing us of anything specific. It's all questions and concerns and routine inquiries. But everyone's acting like we're about to lose our licenses or get shut down by the city. Shane collapsed into a chair, running his hands through his hair. My mom is convinced this is all your grandfather's doing, but I told her that's impossible. I mean, he's just a real estate developer, right? He doesn't have that kind of influence over the whole construction industry. Sally and Rebecca looked at each other again, and Shane caught the expression. Right? He repeated, his voice rising. Please tell me I'm right. Rebecca sighed. Shane, you need to understand something about Brian Buchanan. He didn't get where he is by playing nice or forgetting slights. When someone crosses him, she gestured helplessly at the phone, which had been ringing constantly for the past 2 hours. But this is crazy, Shane protested. It's just a wedding invitation. We weren't trying to insult him. It doesn't matter what you were trying to do, Rebecca said sharply. What matters is what you did. You excluded a man who spent the last 22 years treating Sally like his own daughter, who paid for her education, who's been planning to walk her down the aisle since the day she was born. I never asked him to pay for my college, Sally whispered. He just did it. He said education was the best investment he could make in my future. Shane looked stricken. Sally, I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, Rebecca interrupted. Because you never bothered to ask about our family dynamics before you and your mother decided to redesign Sally's wedding to fit your social expectations. The room fell silent except for the sound of Sally's quiet sobbing. After a few minutes, Shane spoke again. What can we do? How we fix this? Rebecca's laugh was bitter. I don't know if we can. I've known Brian for 20 years, and I've never seen him this angry. He's not just upset, he's hurt. And when Brian Buchanan gets hurt, he doesn't get mad. He gets even. As if summoned by her words, the doorbell rang. Rebecca went to answer it, returning a few minutes later with an overnight delivery envelope. It's for you, she told Sally, handing over the package. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery with Brian's personal letterhead and a cashier's check for $25,000. Sally read the letter aloud, her voice breaking. My dear Sally, your father tells me that you're planning a beautiful, intimate wedding ceremony with just immediate family present. While Helen and I are disappointed that we won't be able to witness this special moment, we respect your wishes and want you to know that we'll be thinking of you with love on your special day. Please accept this small gift as a token of our affection and our hopes for your happiness. Use it for whatever will make your wedding day perfect. We look forward to seeing you soon, perhaps when you return from your honeymoon. All our love, Grandpa Brian and Grandma Helen. Sally stared at the check, her tears falling freely now. $25,000, she whispered. He's giving me $25,000 for a wedding he's not invited to. Shane looked confused. That's incredibly generous. Maybe this means he's not as angry as we thought. Rebecca shook her head. Shane, you still don't understand. This isn't generosity. This is a message. What kind of message? He's telling us that money isn't the issue. This isn't about economics or business relationships or social standing. This is about family. And we just told him he's not family. The phone rang again. This time, Sally answered. Sally. The voice was older, shaky with emotion. Sweetheart, this is Grandma Helen. Grandma, Sally sobbed into the phone. I'm so sorry. This wasn't supposed to happen this way. I know, honey. I know. Listen to me carefully. Your grandfather loves you more than anything in this world. He's hurt right now, and when he's hurt, he does things. Big things. He can't help himself. What do you mean? Helen's voice was urgent now. Sally, you need to call him. Tonight. Tell him you made a mistake. Tell him you want him at your wedding. Before this goes too far. But the Shannon family. Forget the Shannon family, sweet pea. If you want to get married, you're going to need a venue that passes inspection, vendors who show up, and a fiancé whose family business isn't destroyed by regulatory investigations. Sally felt cold dread settling in her stomach. Grandma, what is he going to do? Honey, Helen said sadly. I think he's already doing it. After Sally hung up, the three of them sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Shane spoke. We have to uninvite him, don't we? Sally nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. I have to call him. I have to fix this. But as she reached for the phone, it rang again. This time, the caller ID showed her grandfather's office number. Sally answered with a trembling voice. Grandpa, hello, sweetheart. Brian's voice was warm, loving, and completely terrifying in its calmness. I hope you received my little wedding gift. I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed for your special day. Grandpa, I need to talk to you about the wedding. There's been a misunderstanding. Oh, sweet pea. There's no misunderstanding at all. You want a small, intimate ceremony with just immediate family. I think that's wonderful. Very mature of you to know exactly what you want. But Grandpa, now, I don't want you to worry about anything, Sally. Grandpa's going to make sure your wedding day is absolutely perfect. Everything is going to work out exactly the way it's supposed to. The line went dead, and Sally stared at the phone in her hand. Somewhere in downtown Chicago, Brian Buchanan was making more phone calls, and Sally was beginning to understand that her simple, intimate wedding was about to become very complicated indeed. Chapter 4. The Unraveling. Hugo Shannon sat in his cramped office at 6 a.m., surrounded by stacks of violation notices, inspection reports, and legal documents that seemed to multiply every time he looked away. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he couldn't bring himself to leave his desk long enough to get another cup. The phone rang for what felt like the 100th time that week. Shannon Construction, he answered wearily. Mr. Shannon? This is Cindy Wolf from Wolf Electrical Supply. I'm calling about your outstanding account. Hugo frowned. Outstanding account? We always pay our bills on time. Yes, sir, your payment history has been excellent. But we've received some concerns about Shannon Construction's financial stability, and our company policy requires immediate payment for any outstanding balances when questions arise about a customer's creditworthiness. What kind of concerns? I can't discuss the specifics, but we'll need payment of your current balance, $47,000, before we can release any materials for your ongoing projects. Hugo's hands began to shake. Cindy, we've been doing business for 15 years. You know we're good for it. I'm sorry, Mr. Shannon. Company policy. We'll need payment by close of business today, or we'll have to halt all deliveries. The line went dead. Hugo immediately called his banker. First National, this is Leon Chun. Leon, it's Hugo Shannon. I need you to wire $47,000 to Wolf Electrical Supply today. Mr. Shannon, Leon interrupted. I was actually planning to call you this morning. We've received some inquiries about Shannon Construction's regulatory compliance status, and I'm afraid we'll need to review your credit line before approving any large transactions. Hugo's vision began to blur around the edges. Leon, what the hell is going on? First, the suppliers want immediate payment. Now you're freezing my credit line. It's just routine due diligence, Mr. Shannon. Nothing personal. But when questions arise about a business's regulatory standing, the bank has to protect its interests. What questions? From who? I can't discuss the specifics of our internal review process, but I can tell you that if these regulatory issues are resolved quickly, everything should go back to normal. Hugo slammed the phone down and immediately dialed another number. Dad, Shane's voice sounded as exhausted as Hugo felt. Please tell me you have good news. Son, I need you to get down here right away and bring your checkbook. An hour later, Shane Shannon sat across from his father's desk, staring at a pile of bills and notices that represented the systematic destruction of their family business. Let me understand this, Shane said slowly. In 3 days, our electrical supplier has demanded immediate payment. Our lumber yard has put us on cash-only terms. The concrete company wants to review our account status, and the city has scheduled surprise inspections at all 4 of our active job sites. Plus, the bonding company wants to reassess our capacity. The insurance company is reviewing our risk profile, and 3 of our biggest clients have called to express concerns about project delays. Shane rubbed his temples. And all of this started the morning after I told Sally's family about the wedding guest list. Hugo nodded grimly. Your future wife's grandfather is apparently more connected than we realized. But this is insane, Dad. It's illegal, isn't it? Using business connections to sabotage competitors. Who says he's sabotaging us? Hugo asked bitterly. All I'm hearing is routine business inquiries, regulatory compliance reviews, and standard credit assessments. Nothing illegal about any of it. Shane pulled out his phone and dialed Sally's number. She answered on the first ring. Shane? Thank God. How bad is it? Bad, Sally. Really bad. We might not be able to complete our current projects, let alone stay in business long enough for a wedding reception. Oh God. I called Grandpa last night, but he wouldn't listen. He just kept saying everything was going to work out perfectly. Sally, you have to try again. This is destroying my family. I know, she whispered. I'm going to his office this morning. I'll make him stop this. 2 hours later, Sally stood in the marble lobby of the Buchanan building, wearing the blue dress that had always been her grandfather's favorite. The security guard recognized her immediately and waved her toward the private elevator. Pamela Gilmore looked up as Sally approached Brian's office. Oh, sweetheart, she said with genuine warmth. Your grandfather will be so happy to see you. He's been talking about your wedding all week. Sally knocked on the mahogany door and entered without waiting for permission. Brian looked up from his desk, and his face lit up with the same expression he'd worn when she was 5 years old and brought him crayon drawings. Sally, what a wonderful surprise. Come here and give your old grandfather a hug. She fell into his arms, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne and the leather of his jacket. For a moment, she was 6 years old again, safe in the arms of the man who'd always protected her from everything. Grandpa, she said, pulling back to look at him. We need to talk. Of course, sweetheart. Sit down. Can Pamela get you anything? Coffee? That herbal tea you like? Grandpa, please. I need you to stop what you're doing to Shane's family. Brian's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. I'm not sure what you mean, Sally. The Shannon Construction Company is being destroyed. Suppliers won't deliver materials. The bank froze their credit. The city is conducting surprise inspections. Shane's father is going to lose everything. Brian sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Sally, I think you're giving me credit for more influence than I actually have. If Hugo Shannon is having business problems, that's unfortunate, but it's not my responsibility. Grandpa, please don't lie to me. I know this is because of the wedding invitation. The wedding invitation? Brian's voice carried a note of confusion that might have been convincing if Sally hadn't known him all her life. Sweetheart, you told me you wanted a small, intimate ceremony with just immediate family. I thought that was a lovely idea. I never said that, Sally replied, her voice strengthening. Mrs. Shannon said that. She convinced my parents that excluding you and Grandma was the proper thing to do. I went along with it because I didn't want to cause problems with Shane's family. Brian leaned forward, and for the first time, Sally saw a real emotion flicker across his face. You went along with it. Yes, and I was wrong. I should have stood up for you and Grandma. I should have told them that my grandfather was more important than their social traditions. But you didn't. Sally felt tears starting again. No, I didn't. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Grandpa. Brian stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city he'd helped build. Sally, do you know what I was thinking about on my drive to work this morning? She shook her head. I was thinking about the day you were born. Your father called me at 2 in the morning, screaming into the phone that the baby was coming and they needed to get to the hospital. I threw on some clothes and drove to your house to pick up your parents. Your dad was too nervous to drive safely. Brian smiled at the memory. You were born at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and the loudest cry the nurses had ever heard. When they finally let me hold you, you stopped crying immediately and looked right at me with these serious gray eyes, like you were taking my measure. You turned back to face her. I made you a promise that day, Sally. I promised that I would always be there for you, no matter what. When you took your first steps, I was there. When you had nightmares, I was there. When you graduated high school, I was there. When you needed help with college applications, I was there. Sally's tears were flowing freely now. Grandpa, and now you're getting married. The most important day of your life. And for the first time in 22 years, I won't be there. The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Sally realized she was holding her breath. But I want you there, she whispered. I need you there. Brian's smile was sad and knowing. Do you, Sally? Or do you need Shane's family to approve of your choices more than you need your grandfather? The question hit her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. Here's what's going to happen, Brian continued, his voice returning to its business tone. You're going to go home and think very carefully about what kind of wedding you actually want. Not what Shane wants, not what his parents want, not what your parents think is appropriate. What you want. And if I decide I want you there, then you'll call me. Not your parents, not Shane. You'll call me directly and invite me yourself. And if I do that, you'll stop. Whatever you're doing to Shane's family. Brian's expression was unreadable. Sally, I've told you. I'm not doing anything to Shane's family. But I will say this. If you decide that your grandfather and grandmother are important enough to include in your wedding day, then I suspect many of the Shannon family's business problems will resolve themselves. And if I don't call, Brian walked back to his desk and sat down, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. Then I'll know where I stand with my granddaughter, and I'll act accordingly. Sally stood on shaking legs. I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you know. She kissed his forehead and left his office, her mind spinning with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't been said. In his chair, Brian picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. Kurt? Brian Buchanan. How are those Shannon construction inspections going? Really? That many violations? Well, I suppose you'll have to follow proper procedure. Safety first, as always. The game was accelerating, and Sally Buchanan was about to learn that some choices couldn't be undone. Chapter 5: The Reckoning. At 3 p.m. on Thursday afternoon, Sally stood in her childhood bedroom holding two phones, her cell phone in her right hand, the landline in her left. She'd been staring at them for 20 minutes, paralyzed by a decision that should have been simple but felt like choosing between her past and her future. Downstairs, she could hear Shane pacing in the kitchen while her mother made anxious phone calls to wedding vendors. The reception hall had called that morning to inform them that their event was under review, pending the results of a fire safety inspection. The caterer wanted additional insurance documentation. Even the florist was suddenly concerned about liability issues for events at venues with regulatory questions. Her grandmother's words echoed in her head. If you want to get married, you're going to need a venue that passes inspection, vendors who show up, and a fiancé whose family business isn't destroyed by regulatory investigations. Sally dialed her grandfather's direct line. Brian Buchanan. Grandpa, it's Sally. Hello, sweetheart. How are you doing? His voice was warm, concerned, completely normal, which somehow made everything worse. I'm calling to invite you to my wedding, she said quickly, before she could lose her nerve. You and Grandma. I want you both there for the ceremony and the reception. I should have invited you from the beginning, and I'm sorry I didn't. The silence stretched so long that Sally wondered if the call had dropped. Sally, Brian finally said, I need you to be very clear about something. Are you inviting me because you want me there, or because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't? The question cut straight to the heart of everything she'd been avoiding. Sally sank on her bed, her free hand pressed to her forehead. I don't know, she admitted. I honestly don't know anymore. Then you're not ready to get married. The words hit her like ice water. What? Sally, marriage isn't about pleasing other people or avoiding consequences. It's about choosing your family, the family you're going to build with your husband. If you can't stand up to Shane's parents about a wedding invitation, how are you going to handle the real challenges? What happens when they want to control where you live, how you raise your children, what career choices you make? Sally felt something breaking apart inside her chest. Grandpa, that's not fair. Life isn't fair, sweetheart. But marriage has to be honest. You can't build a life with someone when you're more afraid of disappointing his parents than disappointing yourself. So what are you saying? That I shouldn't get married? I'm saying you should marry Shane when you're ready to choose him over everyone else's opinions, including mine. When you can invite who you want to your wedding without fear or guilt or pressure. When you can look your husband in the eye and know that you chose your life together freely. Sally was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. I do love him, Grandpa. I do want to marry him. I believe you. But love isn't enough, Sally. You also have to be brave enough to fight for that love when other people try to diminish it. What if he breaks up with me over this? What if his parents convince him I'm not worth the trouble? Brian's voice grew gentle. Then he was never worth having in the first place. After she hung up, Sally sat in silence for nearly an hour. When she finally went downstairs, Shane and her mother were huddled around the kitchen table with a laptop, frantically searching for alternative wedding venues. Any luck? Sally asked, though their expressions already provided the answer. The Riverside Country Club is booked until next spring, Rebecca said without looking up. The Fairmont has one date available, but they want a $50,000 security deposit due to recent questions about event planning compliance in the Chicago area. Shane looked up at Sally with desperate eyes. Did you talk to your grandfather? Yes. And Sally pulled out a chair and sat down across from them. He's not going to stop what he's doing until I invite him to the wedding personally. Not because I'm afraid of what he'll do, but because I actually want him there. Shane's face flushed with anger. That's blackmail. Yes, Sally agreed quietly. It is. So we'll invite him, Rebecca said quickly. Problem solved. Call him back and tell him he's invited. Sally shook her head. It's not that simple, Mom. He knows why I called. He knows I'm only inviting him to stop the business pressure on Shane's family. So what? Shane demanded. The important thing is that we get this nightmare ended. Sally looked at her fiancé, really looked at him, and felt something shift inside her chest. Shane, do you want my grandfather at our wedding? I want to get married without my family losing everything in the process. That's not what I asked. Shane's jaw tightened. Sally, I don't understand what's happening here. Your grandfather is destroying my family's business over a stupid wedding invitation. Normal people don't behave this way. You're right. Normal people don't. But then again, normal people also don't exclude their fiancé's grandparents from their wedding because it doesn't fit their social expectations. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rebecca cleared her throat nervously. Sally, honey, maybe we should focus on solving the immediate problem. The immediate problem, Sally interrupted, is that everyone in this situation is more concerned about saving face than doing what's right. Shane stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. What's that supposed to mean? It means your mother decided my grandparents weren't important enough to include in our wedding, and instead of standing up for my family, I went along with it because I didn't want to cause problems. Now we're all paying the price for that cowardice. Cowardice? Shane's voice was dangerously quiet. Sally, my mother has very specific ideas about wedding traditions. She was trying to honor those traditions. Whose traditions, Shane? Because in my family's tradition, the people who love you most are the ones who get to witness your wedding day. The people who supported you and cared for you and helped shape you into the person you are today. And in my family's tradition, weddings are intimate affairs between immediate families only. Sally felt something crystallize in her mind, a clarity she'd been missing for months. Then maybe our family's traditions are incompatible. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Shane stared at her, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and something that might have been fear. What are you saying, Sally? I'm saying that I've spent the last 6 months planning a wedding that makes everyone else happy while ignoring what I actually want. I'm saying that the fact we're having this conversation at all proves we're not ready to get married. Rebecca leaned forward urgently. Sally, you're upset. You're under a lot of pressure. Maybe you should take some time to think. I've been thinking, Mom. For the first time in months, I'm actually thinking clearly. Sally turned back to Shane. I want my grandparents at my wedding. I want them in the front row, and I want my grandfather to walk me down the aisle because my own father is too busy trying to manage his business relationship with my grandfather to stand up for what's right. Shane's face went pale. Sally, you're talking about calling off the wedding over a guest list issue. No, Shane. I'm talking about postponing the wedding until we figure out how to build a marriage that we both actually want instead of one that meets everyone else's expectations. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Shane spoke, his voice hollow. My parents will never forgive this humiliation. Then I guess you have a choice to make, Sally said quietly. You can choose to marry me and deal with your parents' disappointment, or you can choose to make your parents happy and find someone else to marry. Shane stared at her for a long moment, and Sally saw something in his expression that she'd never noticed before, a weakness, a willingness to choose the path of least resistance, even when it meant sacrificing the people he claimed to love. I need some air, he said finally, grabbing his keys and walking toward the door. Shane, Sally called after him. He turned back, hope flickering in his eyes. When you're ready to plan a wedding that's about us instead of about everyone else's expectations, Sally said, call me. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Sally was left alone with her mother in the kitchen, where she'd eaten breakfast every morning for 18 years. Oh, honey, Rebecca said softly. What have you done? Sally reached for her phone and dialed her grandfather's number. Grandpa, it's Sally. I need to come see you. And this time, I know exactly what I want to say. Chapter 6. The Truth. Sally found her grandfather in his study that evening, not behind his imposing desk, but sitting in the worn leather armchair by the fireplace, reading a book with his glasses perched on his nose. The room was lit by a single lamp and the glow from the fireplace, creating the kind of intimate atmosphere that belonged more to family conversations than business negotiations. Grandpa, he looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that had always made her feel like the most important person in the world. Sally, sweetheart, come sit with me. She settled into the matching chair that had been designated as hers since childhood, drawing her legs up under her the way she used to when she was 12 and needed his advice about middle school problems. I broke up with Shane, she said without preamble. Brian set his book aside, giving her his complete attention. How are you feeling about that? Confused. Sad. Relieved. She paused, considering. Mostly relieved, which probably tells me everything I need to know. What happened? Sally pulled a throw pillow against her chest, hugging it like armor. I realized that I was more worried about disappointing his parents than disappointing myself. And when I told him I wanted you and Grandma at the wedding, he acted like I was asking him to choose between me and his family. Weren't you? The question surprised her. I guess I was. But isn't that what marriage is supposed to be? Choosing your spouse over everyone else's expectations. Brian smiled, and Sally saw pride in his expression. That's exactly what marriage is supposed to be. The question is whether Shane was ready to make that choice. He wasn't. And you? Sally thought about it seriously. I wasn't either until today. I've been so focused on having the perfect wedding that I forgot to figure out if I was marrying the right person. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, listening to the crackling of the fire. Finally, Sally spoke again. Grandpa, can I ask you something? Anything. Did you really destroy the Shannon family's business over a wedding invitation? Brian was quiet for so long that Sally wondered if he was going to answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she'd never heard before. Sally, when I was 25 years old, I made a mistake that almost cost me everything. I trusted the wrong person with something important, and they used that trust to try to destroy me. He stared into the fire, his mind clearly in another time and place. I had started a small construction company, just me and 2 employees. We'd landed our first big contract, a commercial building downtown. I was so excited that I was going to prove myself, show everyone that the kid from the South Side could make it in the big leagues. What happened? My business partner at the time was a man named Vincent Morrison. Older than me, more connected, seemed to know everyone in the industry. He convinced me to let him handle the regulatory side of the business while I focused on the actual construction. Brian's jaw tightened. What I didn't know was that Vincent had been taking shortcuts on permits, bribing inspectors, using substandard materials. When the building inspector finally showed up to do a proper assessment, we had violations that could have put us out of business permanently. Oh, Grandpa. Vincent tried to blame everything on me. Said I was the one who had cut corners, that he'd try to warn me, but I wouldn't listen. If I hadn't kept detailed records of every decision, every conversation, every material order, I would have lost everything. Sally was beginning to understand. So you learned how to protect yourself. I learned that in business and in life, people will judge you not by your intentions, but by your actions. And I learned that sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to make sure that the people who would hurt them understand the consequences of their choices. Is that what you did to the Shannons? Brian met her eyes directly. I made some phone calls. I asked some questions. I reminded certain people in the industry that regulatory compliance is important, and that businesses with questionable practices create risks for everyone they work with. You didn't lie about anything? I didn't have to. Hugo Shannon has been cutting corners for years, assuming that his connections would protect him. When those connections dried up, his actual practices spoke for themselves. Sally felt a chill. So the violations were real? Every single one of them. The permit issues, the safety problems, the substandard work, all of it was documented and legitimate. I just made sure the right people knew about it. But you could have made those problems go away just as easily as you created them. Brian nodded. The moment you called to invite me to your wedding, really invite me, because you wanted me there, I would have made some different phone calls. The violations would have been categorized as minor issues. The suppliers would have remembered that Shannon Construction has been a reliable customer for years, and Hugo's business would have continued exactly as it was before. But I didn't call for the right reasons. No, you called because you were afraid. And I've spent too many years watching people make decisions based on fear instead of conviction. Sally was quiet for several minutes, processing everything he'd told her. Finally, she looked up at him. Grandpa, Shane called off the wedding permanently about an hour ago. He said his family could never recover from the humiliation of what happened, and that he couldn't marry someone who would choose her grandfather over his parents. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Are you? Really? Brian considered the question carefully. I'm sorry that you're hurting. I'm sorry that you had to go through the pain of realizing that someone you cared about wasn't the person you thought he was. But am I sorry that you learned this before you married him instead of after? No, Sally. I'm not sorry about that at all. Sally felt tears starting again, but they were different tears than she'd been crying all week. Cleaner somehow, more honest. What happens now to the Shannon family? What do you want to happen? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? Hugo Shannon and his son treated you and our family with disrespect, but they didn't do it out of malice. They did it out of arrogance and social climbing. The question is whether you think they've learned their lesson or whether they need to face more serious consequences. Sally thought about Shane's pale face when she'd told him she wanted her grandparents at the wedding. She thought about Mrs. Shannon's imperious tone when she'd explained that proper weddings didn't include extended family. She thought about her own parents' willingness to go along with exclusions rather than cause social awkwardness. I think, she said slowly, that they've learned as much as they're capable of learning. Brian smiled. Then I think it's time for Hugo Shannon's business problems to resolve themselves. Mistakes happen in all industries, and most problems can be fixed with proper attention and good intentions. Just like that. Just like that. Brian reached over and took her hand. Sally, I want you to understand something. I didn't do what I did to punish Shane or his family for excluding me from your wedding. I did it to show you what it looks like when someone chooses to fight for the people they love, even when it's difficult or expensive or socially awkward. I understand. Do you? Because the most important lesson isn't about me or Shane or even this wedding. It's about you learning to stand up for what matters to you, even when other people try to convince you that their priorities are more important than your own. Sally squeezed his hand. I think I'm starting to understand that. Good. Because there's something else I need to tell you. Sally's stomach tightened. What? Brian's expression grew serious. Your father has been involved in some business dealings that he hasn't told you about. Dealings that affect your future in ways you don't realize. What kind of dealings? That, Brian said, standing and walking to his desk, is a conversation we need to have with your father present. I think it's time Chris learned that actions have consequences and that some lessons are more expensive than others. As he reached for his phone to call Chris, Sally realized that her broken engagement might have been the simplest part of this family drama. The real reckoning, she suspected, was just beginning. Chapter 7. Family Reckonings. Chris Buchanan arrived at his father's house 45 minutes after receiving the summons. His face flushed from either the cold October air or the anxiety that had been gnawing at him since Hugo Shannon's frantic phone calls began 3 days ago. He found Brian and Sally in the study, sitting across from each other like co-conspirators planning their next move. Dad, Sally, he said, settling heavily into the third chair. I assume this is about the wedding situation. Among other things, Brian replied, his voice carrying the neutral tone that Chris had learned to fear during his teenage years. Sally has some news to share with you. Sally straightened in her chair. Dad, I broke up with Shane. The wedding is off. Chris blinked several times, as if trying to process information that didn't compute. What do you mean off? Sally, you can't just call off a wedding because of a family disagreement. I can and I did. Sally's voice was steady, carrying an authority that reminded Chris uncomfortably of his father. Shane made it clear that his parents' social expectations were more important to him than my family relationships. But the deposits, the venue, the invitations will be dealt with appropriately, Brian interrupted. That's not why you're here, Chris. Chris felt his stomach drop. The tone in his father's voice suggested that the wedding catastrophe was merely the opening act in a much larger performance. Then why am I here? Brian opened a thick folder on his desk and withdrew several documents. You're here because it's time we discussed your future at Buchanan Enterprises. The blood drained from Chris's face. What about my future? Well, let's start with your current compensation package. Salary, benefits, company car, expense account. It all totals roughly $180,000 per year. Dad, I know what I make. Do you know what you're worth? The question hung in the air like a blade. Chris opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. I've had 3 independent consultants evaluate your position and performance over the past 6 months, Brian continued, consulting the papers in front of him. The consensus is that your actual contribution to the company, in terms of revenue generated, deals closed, client relationships managed, is worth approximately $65,000 per year. Sally watched her father's face crumple as the numbers sank in. She felt a mixture of pity and disappointment that surprised her with its intensity. "Dad," Chris said weakly, "I've been with the company for 15 years. 15 years during which I've subsidized your lifestyle to the tune of more than $100,000 annually. Call it a family discount." Brian set down the first document and picked up another. "But that's not the interesting part, Chris. The interesting part is what you've done with that subsidy. I don't understand. The house in Winnetka, the country club membership, the private school tuition for Sally, the luxury cars, the European vacations, the investment account you thought I didn't know about." Chris was beginning to look physically ill. "Those are normal expenses for someone in my position. Someone in your position can't afford those expenses on their actual market value." Which raises the question, what happens when the family discount ends? The silence in the room was deafening. Sally realized she was holding her breath. "You're firing me?" Chris whispered. "I'm restructuring your position to reflect your actual worth to the company. Effective next month, your salary will be adjusted to $65,000 per year. No company car, no expense account, no performance bonuses unless you actually perform." "But I can't live on that. The mortgage payments alone. Then I suggest you find a way to increase your value to the company, or find employment elsewhere." Chris turned to Sally with desperate eyes. "Sally, tell him he can't do this. I'm his son." "You're my son," Brian interrupted, "which is exactly why I should have done this years ago. I've enabled your mediocrity for too long, and it's made you weak." "Weak?" Chris's voice cracked. "Dad, I've worked for you for 15 years. You've been employed by me for 15 years. There's a difference." Brian stood and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds that represented decades of hard work and careful planning. "Chris, when I was your age, I was working 16-hour days, building this company from nothing. I was making decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in investments. I was taking risks and accepting responsibility for the consequences." He turned back to face his son. "What risks have you taken? What decisions have you made that actually mattered? What have you built that would exist without my intervention?" The questions hit Chris like physical blows. Sally watched her father struggle to find answers that didn't exist. "I've been loyal," Chris said finally. "I've been dependable. You've been comfortable. And comfort without achievement is just another word for stagnation." Brian returned to his desk and pulled out one final document. "However, I'm not without sympathy for your situation. I understand that adjusting to your new salary will be difficult." He slid the paper across to Chris. "This is an offer to purchase your house in Winnetka. Fair market value, cash, 30-day closing." Chris stared at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. "You want to buy my house? I want to help you transition to a lifestyle you can actually afford. The house sale will give you enough capital to purchase something more modest and pay off your credit card debts." "My credit card debts?" Sally saw her grandfather's smile turn predatory. "Chris, did you really think I didn't know about the $40,000 you owe across 6 different accounts? The personal loan you took against your 401k? The line of credit you opened using company assets as collateral without authorization?" Chris looked like he was about to vomit. "Dad, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. Just like you explained to Sally and Rebecca that excluding your parents from the wedding was the proper thing to do. Just like you explained to me that this was about keeping things simple." Brian's voice grew cold. "What was actually about, Chris, was your embarrassment over the fact that your lifestyle exceeds your actual worth, and your fear that Hugo Shannon and his family would realize that you're not the successful businessman you pretend to be." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sally stared at her father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in her adult life. "That's not," Chris began, then stopped. "Isn't it? You were so worried about maintaining your image with the Shannon family that you were willing to exclude your own parents from their granddaughter's wedding. You chose social climbing over family loyalty." Sally felt something shift inside her chest, a final piece of understanding clicking into place. "Dad, is that true? Were you embarrassed by Grandpa?" Chris couldn't meet her eyes. "Sally, it wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that. Brian said quietly. Your father has spent years trying to distance himself from his working-class roots, try to reinvent himself as old money instead of new money. Having his father, the man who worked construction before he built an empire, at his daughter's wedding didn't fit the image he wanted to project. Sally felt tears of anger and disappointment burning behind her eyes. Dad, how could you do that to your own parents? I was trying to protect you, Chris said desperately. The Shannon family is influential, connected. I thought if we played by their rules. You thought if you sacrificed your parents' feelings, you might get invited to better parties, Brian interrupted. You thought you could trade family loyalty for social advancement. The room fell silent except for the sound of Chris's labored breathing. What happens now? Sally asked quietly. Brian looked at his son with an expression that mixed disappointment with something that might have been pity. That depends on your father. He can accept his new position and salary, work to prove his actual value to the company, and begin rebuilding the relationships he's damaged. Or he can find employment elsewhere and try to maintain his lifestyle on someone else's charity. And if I choose to leave, then you leave. No severance package, no references, no family safety net. You'll be free to succeed or fail based entirely on your own merits. Chris stared at the papers on the desk, his hands trembling slightly. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up at his father. How long do I have to decide? You don't. You decided 3 days ago when you came here to deliver the Shannon family's social demands instead of standing up for your own parents. Brian closed the folder and placed it in his desk drawer. Report to work Monday morning at $65,000 per year, or don't report at all. Those are your options. As Chris stood to leave, Sally called after him. Dad! He turned back, hope flickering in his eyes. I love you, she said, but I'm ashamed of you right now. And I think you should be ashamed of yourself, too. The door closed behind Chris with a soft click, leaving Sally alone with her grandfather in the study, where she'd learned some of the most important lessons of her life. Was that necessary? She asked. Brian sat back in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. Sally, sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is to stop enabling their weakest impulses. And sometimes it's too late for kindness. They sat in silence as the fire burned lower, both thinking about the choices that had led to this moment and the ones that would determine what happened next. Chapter 8. The Reckoning Complete. The following Monday morning, Hugo Shannon sat in his truck outside the Buchanan building, staring up at the gleaming towers of glass and steel that represented everything he'd never quite achieved in his own business career. His phone had been buzzing constantly since 6 a.m. with calls from suppliers, inspectors, and clients. But this time, the news was different. The electrical supply company had called to apologize for the computer error that had flagged his account for immediate payment. The building inspector wanted to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss resolving the minor compliance issues identified during last week's surprise inspections. 3 of his biggest clients had called to confirm that their projects were still on schedule. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, transforming his business catastrophe back into the comfortable mediocrity he'd operated in for 20 years. But Hugo knew the switch could be flipped again just as easily. He took the elevator to the 42nd floor, where Pamela Gilmore greeted him with professional courtesy and directed him to Brian's office. The walk across that marble floor reception area felt longer than any journey of his life. Brian looked up from his desk as Hugo entered, his expression neutral but not hostile. Hugo, thank you for coming. Mr. Buchanan. Hugo remained standing, unsure whether he was there as a supplicant or an equal. I got your message. Please sit. Can Pamela bring you anything? Coffee. Hugo shook his head and settled into the chair across from Brian's desk. The same chair where visiting politicians and business leaders conducted negotiations worth millions of dollars. I suppose you know why you're here, Brian said. I think so, but I'd like to hear it from you directly. Brian leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in a gesture Hugo had seen in 100 business meetings, but never from this side of the power dynamic. Hugo, your business problems from last week, the permit issues, the supplier concerns, the regulatory scrutiny, those problems have been resolved. Yes, sir. I noticed. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We haven't discussed the terms. Hugo's stomach tightened. Terms. You and your family made some choices about my granddaughter's wedding that hurt people I care about. Those choices had consequences. The question now is what you've learned from those consequences. Hugo swallowed hard. Mr. Buchanan, I want you to know that the guest list wasn't my idea. My wife got some notion about wedding traditions, and Sally's parents went along with it. I should have spoken up, but I didn't want to cause family problems. You didn't want to cause problems with your wife, so you were willing to cause problems with your future daughter-in-law's family. When you put it that way, it sounds worse than I intended. Brian's smile was thin. Intentions matter less than actions, Hugo, and actions have consequences. What do you want me to do? I want you to understand something about the business world you operate in. Success isn't just about competency, though that's important. It's about relationships, trust, and understanding that your decisions affect other people's lives. Brian opened a folder on his desk. For 20 years, you've run a decent construction company. Not great, not terrible, just adequate. You made a comfortable living, employed a handful of people, completed projects on time, and mostly on budget. I've tried to run an honest business. Have you? Because I have reports here that suggest otherwise. Permit shortcuts, inspection irregularities, material substitutions that save money but compromise quality. Hugo felt his face flush. Those were isolated incidents. There were patterns of behavior that went unnoticed because you stayed small enough to avoid scrutiny. But when you decided to move in more influential circles, when you started planning weddings at venues like the Grand Millennium, you attracted attention from people who noticed details. The message was clear. Hugo's business had been operating in the shadows, and Brian had the power to drag it into the light anytime he chose. What do you want from me? I want you to run your business the way you should have been running it all along. Real permits, honest materials, legitimate safety practices. No shortcuts, no corner cutting, no good enough solutions. That will increase my costs significantly. Then increase your prices accordingly. Or improve your efficiency. Or find a different line of work. Hugo stared at the man across the desk, recognizing that his comfortable mediocrity was being replaced by a choice between excellence and failure. And if I agree to these terms, then Shannon Construction will find that some very lucrative subcontracting opportunities become available. Projects where attention to quality and regulatory compliance are valued more than low-bid pricing. And if I don't, Brian's expression didn't change, but Hugo felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees. Then you'll discover that Chicago's construction industry is smaller and more interconnected than you realized. Word travels fast when questions arise about a contractor's reliability. The offer was clear. Accept Brian's oversight and profit from his connections, or refuse and face systematic exclusion from the business community Brian influenced. How long do I have to think about it? You don't. You've already demonstrated your decision-making process, and it's what got us here. Either you commit to running your business properly, starting today, or you don't. Hugo thought about his son Shane, who had called that morning to tell him the wedding was off permanently and that he was considering job opportunities in other cities. He thought about his wife, whose social ambitions had triggered this entire catastrophe. He thought about his employees, who had done nothing wrong but might pay the price for his choices. I accept your terms, he said quietly. Brian nodded and pulled a business card from his desk drawer. Excellent. This is the contact information for my preferred safety inspector and compliance consultant. They'll help you bring your current projects up to standard and establish protocols for future work. Hugo took the card, noting that it belonged to one of the most expensive consulting firms in Chicago. Mr. Buchanan, can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you giving me this opportunity? After everything that happened, you could just destroy my business and be done with it. Brian was quiet for a moment, considering his response. Hugo, I didn't do what I did to punish you or your son. I did it to teach my granddaughter that people who love her should be willing to fight for her, and that she should never settle for relationships with people who won't. And did she learn that lesson? She did. She broke up with Shane and called off the wedding. Hugo's face went pale. She broke up with him? Shane made it clear that his parents' social expectations were more important to him than Sally's family relationships. She decided she deserved better. The older man sat back in his chair, absorbing this information. My son is heartbroken. He really loved her. Did he? Because love means choosing someone over everyone else's opinions, including your parents. Shane chose social acceptance over Sally's feelings, just like you and your wife chose social traditions over basic courtesy. Hugo nodded slowly, understanding that his family's priorities have been exposed and found wanting. Is there any chance they might work things out? Brian's expression softened slightly. That's not up to me, Hugo. If Shane wants to win Sally back, he'll need to prove that he's learned from this experience. He'll need to show her that she matters more to him than his parents' approval. And until then, you and I have business to conduct. I suggest you call that consulting firm today. The sooner you bring your operations into full compliance, the sooner those lucrative subcontracting opportunities become available. Hugo stood to leave, then paused at the door. Mr. Buchanan? For what it's worth, I'm sorry about how this all happened. Sally seems like a wonderful young woman, and you're right, she deserved better from our family. Brian's smile was genuine for the first time in the conversation. Hugo, that's the first thing you've said since you walked in here that suggests you might actually have learned something from this experience. After Hugo left, Brian sat alone in his office, looking out at the city he'd spent decades conquering one deal at a time. His phone buzzed with a text message from Helen. How did it go? He typed back, the lesson is complete. Hugo Shannon understands the rules now. And Sally is stronger than she was a week ago. She'll make better choices next time. And Chris. Brian paused before answering. His son had reported to work that morning, accepted his reduced salary without complaint, and spent the day making phone calls to clients he'd been neglecting for months. It was a start, but only a start. Chris is learning that actions have consequences. Whether he learns quickly enough to save his career remains to be seen. Brian put his phone away and returned to the stack of contracts on his desk. The game was over, the lessons had been taught, and the consequences had been distributed according to the choices people had made. But the most important outcome wasn't Hugo Shannon's reformed business practices or Chris's reduced circumstances. It was the look in Sally's eyes when she'd told him she was ashamed of her father's behavior and proud of her grandfather's principles. That look told Brian that the next generation of Buchanans would be stronger than the current one, and that, more than any business victory, was worth whatever it had cost to achieve. Chapter 9, New Foundations. 3 months later, Sally stood in her grandfather's study, wearing a navy blue interview suit and holding a letter that had arrived in the morning mail. The late January sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the silver in Brian's hair as he looked up from the real estate contracts he'd been reviewing. How did it go? He asked, setting aside his work to give her his full attention. I got the job. Sally's smile was radiant, different from the careful, people-pleasing expression she'd worn for most of the previous year. This smile belonged entirely to her. Senior marketing coordinator at Morrison & Associates. They want me to start Monday. Brian stood and embraced her, his pride evident in the strength of his hug. Congratulations, sweetheart. Tell me about it. It's a mid-sized firm that specializes in commercial real estate development. They like my business degree and my internship experience, but what really impressed them was my understanding of family business dynamics. She laughed, and Brian heard a confidence in her voice that hadn't been there before. Apparently, my interview stories about learning to navigate complex stakeholder relationships made quite an impression. I'm not surprised. You've had excellent training in that area recently. They settled into their usual chairs by the fireplace, the same chairs where they'd had some of the most important conversations of Sally's life. How's your father adjusting to his new position? Brian asked. Sally's expression grew more serious. Better than I expected, actually. He's been working longer hours, taking on projects he used to delegate, actually engaging with clients instead of just managing paperwork. And the lifestyle adjustments. They moved into a smaller house in Arlington Heights. Mom had to give up the country club membership and trade her BMW for a Honda, but she's handling it better than I thought she would. Sally paused, choosing her words carefully. I think Mom is actually happier now. The constant pressure to keep up appearances was exhausting her. She started volunteering at the Literacy Center and taking art classes. She seems more like herself. Brian nodded approvingly. Sometimes the most liberating thing that can happen to someone is discovering they can live without the things they thought they needed. Dad is learning that lesson too. He told me last week that he's been promoted to project manager on the Harbor Point development. Real responsibilities, real authority. He earned it. His work on that project has been exceptional. Sally studied her grandfather's face. You're proud of him. I'm proud that he's choosing to grow instead of giving up. The salary reduction was never about punishment, Sally. It was about motivation. I know, and I think he's finally figured that out. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Finally, Sally spoke again. Grandpa, I have something to tell you. Her tone was serious enough to make Brian give her his complete attention. What is it? Shane called me last week. Brian's expression didn't change, but Sally saw his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. And he wanted to apologize. For everything. For his family's behavior about the wedding guest list, for not standing up for me when I said I wanted you and Grandma there, for choosing his parents' approval over our relationship. That's good of him. He also wanted to tell me that he's been seeing a therapist, working on boundary issues with his parents, learning to make decisions based on his own values instead of their expectations. Brian waited for her to continue, and he wanted to know if I'd be willing to have dinner with him, not to get back together, just to talk, to see if we could at least be friends. How do you feel about that? Sally considered the question seriously. I think I'd like that. I did care about him, and I think he's genuinely trying to change. But I also realize that I'm different now. Stronger. I know what I'm willing to compromise on and what I'm not. I know the difference between loving someone and needing their approval. Brian's smile was proud and sad at the same time. That's one of the most important lessons anyone can learn. I have you to thank for that, for showing me that people who love me should be willing to fight for me, and that I should never settle for less. Sally, the only thing I did was refuse to pretend that being excluded didn't hurt. You're the one who chose to stand up for what mattered to you, even when it cost you a relationship you thought you wanted. Sally pulled an envelope from her purse. I have something for you. Inside was a check for $25,000, the wedding gift Brian had given her 3 months earlier. Grandpa, I can't keep this. It doesn't feel right. Brian looked at the check, then at his granddaughter. Sally, what do you plan to do with your first paycheck from your new job? I thought I'd start looking for my own apartment. I love living at home, but I'm 22 years old. It's time I had my own place. And what kind of apartment were you thinking of? Nothing fancy. A 1-bedroom in a safe neighborhood, close to public transportation. I've been looking at places in the $1,200 to $1,500 range. Brian folded the check and handed it back to her. Consider this a housewarming gift, then. Security deposit, first month's rent, furniture, all the things you'll need to make your new place a home. But Grandpa, this is too much. Sally, do you know what I was thinking about during those dark days when the wedding was falling apart and your father was learning some difficult truths about himself? She shook her head. I was thinking about legacy, not the business empire or the real